They thought it was just another delivery. A few packages, a few miles, then back home before midnight. But on America's backroads, night doesn't play by the rules. Engines stall for no reason. Radios whisper voices that shouldn't exist. And headlights reveal things that don't belong on this side of reality. Some drivers swore they saw figures waiting at the edge of the woods. Others never got the chance to tell their story at all. So buckle up. Keep your doors locked. Because out here, on the loneliest roads in America, something else is making deliveries. This is Verified Fears. And these are 11 disturbing encounters that'll make you think twice before taking the backroads again. Have you ever felt like a place was deliberately trying to trap you, no matter which direction you drove? I'm Nayla, and I've been driving for Amazon Flex for about 2 years now. Most evenings, I take the rural routes outside Baton Rouge because the pay is better and traffic is non-existent. I've delivered to some strange places, trailer parks in the middle of nowhere, houses accessible only by dirt roads that destroy my suspension, properties where the nearest neighbor is 3 miles away. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened on October 12th along Old River Road. The thing about delivering packages in rural Louisiana is that you get used to the weird stuff pretty quickly. Customers who answer the door with shotguns because they weren't expecting anyone. Houses that look abandoned but somehow receive regular deliveries, addresses that don't show up on any map except the one in your delivery app. You learn to roll with it, drop the package, take the photo, and move on to the next stop. That evening, the fog was rolling in thick from the bayou, the kind that turns everything ghostly and makes Spanish moss hanging from the oak trees look like reaching fingers. It was about 6:30, and the sun was already setting behind the trees, casting everything in this orange-purple glow that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so unsettling. My first odd delivery of the evening was to 4472 Cypress Bend Lane, a package for someone named Mariana. The GPS took me down a narrow road I'd never been on before, deeper into the bayou than I usually went. The house appeared suddenly through the fog, a 2-story place with peeling white paint, a sagging porch, and shutters hanging at odd angles. The kind of house that screams abandoned, but somehow isn't quite falling apart enough to be condemned. I grabbed the package, jogged up to the porch through the humid air that felt like breathing through wet cotton, and left it by the front door. The whole time, I had this crawling feeling on the back of my neck, like someone was watching from inside, but the windows were too dark to see anything. I snapped my photo, hurried back to my car, and marked the delivery complete. 3 stops later, around 7:15, I had a package for Selena at 8891 Old River Road, which according to my GPS was about 4 miles south of where I'd just been. I followed the route, winding through fog that was getting thicker by the minute, and after about 10 minutes of driving, I pulled up to a house and my stomach dropped. It was the same house. Same peeling white paint, same sagging porch, same shutters. I sat in my car staring at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe there were 2 similar houses out here. That had to be it. Old plantation-style homes probably all looked similar, right? I checked my phone. The address was definitely different. 8891 Old River Road. The previous delivery had been Cypress Bend Lane, completely different street. Grabbed the package and walked up to the porch. And that's when I noticed something that made my hands start shaking. There was a package already sitting by the door. My package. The one I delivered 20 minutes ago to Mariana at the completely different address. I stood there frozen, trying to understand what I was looking at. The package had Mariana's name on the label. I pulled up my delivery photos on my phone with trembling fingers. There it was. The photo I'd taken at 6:47 p.m., showing this exact porch, this exact door, this exact package. But I was at a different address now. I was supposed to be 4 miles away. I looked at the house again, really looked at it this time. Same broken window on the second floor. Same crack in the porch railing. Same faded wreath hanging on the door that I'd noticed before, but hadn't really registered. This wasn't a similar house. This was the exact same house. I dropped Selena's package next to Mariana's, took my photo with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, and practically ran back to my car. I locked the doors immediately and sat there trying to catch my breath. The logical part of my brain was screaming that there had to be an explanation. GPS glitch. I'd gotten turned around in the fog. Something. But I'd been driving these roads for 2 years. I knew how to follow directions. I knew the difference between Cypress Bend Lane and Old River Road. They weren't even close to each other on the map. I pulled up my route again. 11 more stops to go. I could just skip any more weird addresses and report the issue later. But I needed this money, and Amazon Flex doesn't take kindly to skip deliveries without a damn good reason. GPS malfunction made me arrive at the same house twice. Wasn't going to cut it. I forced myself to keep driving, taking deep breaths, telling myself I was tired and confused, and the fog was playing tricks on my depth perception. The next few deliveries went fine. Normal houses, normal people, normal everything. By 8 o'clock, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing or gotten confused in the fog. Then I saw the next address on my route. 2156 Terrebonne Trail. Package for Reagan. That was at least 6 miles east, in a completely different area I'd delivered to dozens of times before. I knew exactly where Terrebonne Trail was. I followed my GPS, watching the little blue dot move along roads I recognized. And then suddenly, I wasn't on Terrebonne Trail at all. I was on a narrow dirt road, and the fog was so thick my headlights barely penetrated it. The GPS kept saying, "Arriving at destination," and when the road opened up into a small clearing, I knew what I was going to see before I saw it. The house. The same goddamn house. And this time, there were 2 packages on the porch. Mine. Both of them. Mariana's and Selena's, sitting exactly where I'd left them. I didn't get out of the car. I couldn't. I just sat there with my engine running, staring at that house. Through the fog, watching the way the porch light, which I swear hadn't been on before, cast long shadows across the warped wooden boards. My phone showed the address as 2156 Terrebonne Trail. My GPS showed I was at 2156 Terrebonne Trail. But I wasn't. I was at that house again, and I had no idea where that house actually was. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were 3 other packages on the porch now. Not mine. Older ones, with labels so weathered I couldn't read them from the car. How long had they been sitting there? Who had delivered them? I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my remaining deliveries, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. 8 more stops. I looked at the addresses, really looked at them this time. They were all different streets, all different areas I knew well. But something told me if I followed the GPS to any of them, I'd end up right back here at this house that shouldn't exist in multiple places at once. I made a decision right then. I put my car in reverse and backed away from the house without delivering Reagan's package, without taking a photo, without marking anything complete. The GPS immediately started recalculating, trying to get me to turn around, telling me I was going the wrong way. I ignored it. I drove forward, not following the GPS at all, just following the dirt road back the way I thought I'd come. But the road kept going and going, and the fog got thicker. And I realized, after 15 minutes of driving, that I should have hit Old River Road by now. I should have hit something. Instead, I was still on this nameless dirt road, and through the fog ahead, I saw a clearing. No. No, no, no. I stopped the car completely and just sat there shaking. I couldn't see the house yet, but I knew it was there, waiting. I don't know how long I sat in that car trying to figure out what to do. It felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, I pulled out my phone and did something I'd never done before. I called Amazon Flex support and told them I had a family emergency and had to end my route immediately. They weren't happy, but I didn't care. I turned my car around on that narrow road, driving through grass and nearly getting stuck, and I just drove. No GPS, no map, just drove toward where I hoped civilization was. It took 45 minutes to find a main road, and when I finally saw the lights of a gas station, I actually cried with relief. I reported my car had broken down and had to abandon the rest of my route. Took the hit to my rating. Didn't care. The next day, I went back during daylight to try to find that house, figure out what the hell had happened. I drove every road in that area for hours. Cypress Bend Lane didn't exist. Terrebonne Trail was there, but there was no house at 2156. Old River Road had houses, but none of them looked anything like what I'd seen. It was like the night before had happened in some parallel version of Louisiana that only exists after dark when the fog rolls in. I still drive for Amazon Flex, still take the rural routes. But I added a rule for myself now. If the GPS takes me somewhere that gives me that wrong feeling, that crawling sensation on the back of my neck, I mark it as undeliverable and move on. I don't care about my ratings anymore, because sometimes there are places that exist in the spaces between the map and reality, and they're waiting for someone stupid enough to keep delivering to them. I don't know what would have happened if I'd kept following that GPS, kept arriving at that house over and over again. Maybe eventually, I would have walked up to the porch and found a package with my own name on it. Maybe I would have opened the door and found myself inside, unable to leave. Or maybe I would have just kept driving in circles through the fog until my gas ran out, and I became another abandoned car on a road that doesn't appear on any map. I don't want to find out. And if you're ever driving through rural Louisiana and your GPS takes you somewhere that feels wrong, somewhere you shouldn't be, listen to that instinct. Turn around. Some deliveries aren't meant to be completed. Some addresses should stay lost. What would you do if you realized someone had been watching you in complete darkness for over 20 minutes? My name is Jensen, and I've been hauling freight for FedEx across the Montana Mountain Territories for 12 years. When people hear that, they usually picture scenic drives and beautiful landscapes, maybe some occasional bad weather. What they don't picture is what the job actually entails during winter months. Driving through literal whiteout conditions at 3 in the morning, chains on your tires, crawling at 15 miles per hour on switchbacks, where one wrong move sends you 1,000 feet down a cliff face. They don't picture delivering life-saving medical supplies to people so remote that you're their only lifeline to the outside world. And if you don't show up, people die. That's the part of the job that keeps me going, even on the worst nights. The part that made me take the delivery that I still have nightmares about. It was January 17th, and I'd gotten a priority medical delivery around 2 in the morning. Insulin supplies for a diabetic patient living up in the Tobacco Root Mountains, about 40 miles from the nearest town. The weather report was calling for heavy snow, but the dispatcher told me the customer had called 3 times asking when their delivery would arrive, and their voice had sounded desperate. I've done enough of these runs to know what desperation sounds like. It sounds like someone rationing their last few doses, doing the math on whether they'll make it another day. So I loaded up my van, checked my emergency supplies, extra food, water, blankets, satellite phone, flares, and headed out into the storm. The drive up was exactly as bad as I expected, maybe worse. The snow was coming down so thick my wipers could barely keep up, and even with chains, I could feel the van sliding on the switchbacks. Wind was howling loud enough that I couldn't hear my radio. Temperature outside was hovering around -15 before factoring in wind chill. The kind of cold that kills you in minutes if you're not prepared. The kind of cold where exposed skin gets frostbite in under 5 minutes. I'd driven this route maybe a dozen times over the years, always in bad conditions because that's when people need deliveries most, and I knew every turn, every landmark. Around 3:15 a.m., I finally saw the reflective marker indicating the turnoff for the cabin. The driveway was a quarter mile of unplowed snow, and I had to gun it a couple times to keep from getting stuck, but I made it. The cabin sat in a small clearing, surrounded by dense pine forest that was just dark shapes in my headlights. Single story, smoke coming from the chimney, one light on inside. Normal enough, except for how isolated it was. The nearest neighbor was probably 10 miles away. I grabbed the medical supply package, pulled my heavy coat tight, put on my face covering, and stepped out into the absolute worst conditions I'd encountered in years. The wind hit me like a physical force, and the snow was blinding. I could barely see the cabin, even though it was maybe 30 feet away. I trudged through snow that was knee-deep in places, finally made it to the door, and knocked hard. Took about a minute before the door opened, and a woman around 70 years old stood there, wrapped in blankets. Her name was Kimberly, according to my delivery notes. She looked exhausted and relieved in equal measure. She invited me in to warm up for a few minutes before heading back down the mountain, and I'm not too proud to admit I accepted. My face was already going numb, and I needed to make sure I could feel my fingers for the drive back. Her cabin was small but warm, heated by a wood stove that was cranking out serious heat. She made me coffee while I stood by the stove, and we made small talk. She'd lived up here for 30 years, since her husband passed. Grew up in these mountains and couldn't imagine living anywhere else. She asked about road conditions, and I told her honestly they were as bad as I'd seen. But I'd make it back fine. I've been doing this too long to get stuck. After about 20 minutes, I felt human again and told her I needed to head out before conditions got any worse. She thanked me about a dozen times, told me I was a lifesaver, and I told her it was just the job. She walked me to the door, and I stepped back out into the storm. That's when I saw them. Footprints in the snow. Fresh ones. The falling snow hadn't filled them in yet. They started at the tree line about 40 feet from where I'd parked, came up to my van, and circled it. Not just a quick circle, multiple circles, like someone had walked around it over and over again, examining it from every angle. The prints came right up to the driver's side window, the passenger side, the back doors. Someone had cupped their hands and looked inside based on the smudge marks on the windows that I could see even through the falling snow. Then the footprints led back into the tree line and disappeared. But here's the thing that made my stomach drop. The footprints were barefoot. I stood there in -15-degree weather, wind chill making it feel closer to -30, staring at perfect impressions of bare human feet in the snow. Toe prints, arch prints, heel prints. Someone had been out here, walking around in the snow with no shoes, while I'd been inside the cabin for 20 minutes. I looked toward the tree line where the prints disappeared. But I couldn't see anything beyond about 10 feet in the storm. Just darkness and snow and wind. My brain was trying to process what I was seeing because it didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. No one could survive out here barefoot. Frostbite would set in within minutes. Hypothermia would follow. You'd be dead within the hour, probably less. But the prints were fresh. I could see where the person's toes had pressed into the snow, where their heel had sunk deeper. These weren't old prints. Someone had made them while I was inside. I turned around and knocked on Kimberly's door again, harder this time. She opened it looking confused, and I asked her if anyone else lived up here, anyone who might be wandering around outside. Her face went pale, and she said no. The nearest person was her nephew Joaquin, and he lived 10 miles east. No one else came up here, especially not in weather like this. I showed her the footprints, and I watched her face change from confusion to fear. She pulled me back inside and locked the door. And then she told me something I wish I didn't know. 3 years ago, a hiker named Coulson had gone missing in these mountains during winter. Search and rescue had looked for weeks, but never found a body. The assumption was he'd fallen into a ravine or gotten buried in an avalanche. But 2 other hikers had gone missing in the same area over the past decade, both in winter, both never found. Local old-timers, the ones who'd lived in these mountains their whole lives, had stories about something that lived up in the high country. Something that didn't feel the cold. Something that watched people. She'd never believed it, thought it was just campfire stories to scare tourists. But sometimes, late at night, she'd hear footsteps on her porch. She'd look outside and see nothing. But in the morning, when there was fresh snow, she'd occasionally find barefoot prints. She'd convinced herself it was her imagination, that she was seeing patterns that weren't there. Looking at my face, she said she could tell I wasn't the imaginative type. I wasn't. I'm about as practical as they come. 12 years of mountain driving teaches you to trust what you can see and verify. But I was seeing barefoot prints in lethal conditions, and I couldn't explain them. Kimberly told me I should wait until daylight to leave, that it wasn't safe to drive in these conditions anyway. And maybe whatever was out there would be gone by morning. But I thought about those prints circling my van. I thought about something standing in the darkness, watching me deliver a package, watching me walk into the cabin, waiting. And I knew I couldn't stay there. I told her I was leaving, and I told her she should come with me. She refused. This was her home, and she wasn't going to be driven out by footprints. I gave her my satellite phone number and told her to call if anything happened, anything at all. Then I checked my van, made sure all the doors were locked, that nothing had been tampered with. Started the engine and let it warm up while I watched the tree line. The footprints were already starting to fill in with fresh snow, but they were still visible, still leading back into the darkness. I put the van in gear and started the slow journey back down the mountain. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me, but there was nothing. Just snow and darkness. The drive down took even longer than the drive up because I was paranoid and kept checking my mirrors, kept looking at the tree line whenever my headlights swept across it. Took me almost 2 hours to get back to the main highway, and I've never been so relieved to see another vehicle in my life. When I got back to the depot, I wrote up the delivery as completed and didn't mention the footprints. Who would believe me? But I pulled the footage from my van's exterior camera system, the one that records when the vehicle is parked. I sat in the depot office and watched it, and my hands started shaking. The footage showed exactly what I'd seen. Bare footprints appearing in the snow, circling the van, someone standing just outside camera range in the tree line. The timestamp showed they'd been there for 18 minutes. just watching, waiting. The footage never showed who or what made the prints, just the prints themselves appearing in the snow, and that shape in the darkness that might have been a person or might have been a shadow or might have been something else. I deleted the footage. I don't know why. Maybe because I didn't want to know what I'd see if I looked at it more closely. Maybe because some things are better left unexamined. I still take deliveries in the Montana mountains. It's my job, and people need their medications and supplies. But I don't take deliveries to that address anymore. I told dispatch that the road is too dangerous, that they need to find another driver. They found one. His name is Andre, young guy. Been driving for maybe 2 years. I wanted to warn him about what I'd seen. But what would I say? Watch out for barefoot people who don't feel the cold? He'd think I was crazy. Maybe I am. But 3 weeks after I stopped taking that route, Andre called me, asked if I'd ever seen anything weird up at that cabin. Said he'd found footprints circling his van, barefoot ones. I told him to request a different route. I don't know if he did. I hope he did. Because whatever is up in those mountains, it's still there. Still watching, still waiting in the cold that should kill anything human. And the worst part? I keep thinking about those 18 minutes. Thinking about something standing in darkness so complete I couldn't see 5 feet in front of my face, just watching my van, watching the cabin, waiting for something. What was it waiting for? What would have happened if I'd stayed longer, or if I'd gone into the trees to investigate? I don't have answers, and I don't want them. Some questions are better left unasked. Some deliveries should come with warnings that have nothing to do with road conditions. Would you have opened that package, knowing you might see something you could never forget? I'm Aaliyah, 34 years old, and I've been driving for UPS across the Arizona desert routes for 6 years. People think delivery driving is mindless work, just following GPS and dropping boxes. But out here in the empty parts of the state, you become something else entirely. You're sometimes the only person these isolated residents see for weeks. You're their connection to the rest of the world, bringing them everything from medication to birthday presents to the supplies they need to survive, in places where the nearest grocery store is 70 miles away. I've always taken that responsibility seriously. Always made sure packages got where they needed to go, always treated every delivery like it mattered, because it does. That's why what happened on August 3rd has been eating at me every single day since. Why I can't sleep without seeing that package in my mind. Why I wake up at night wondering if I made the right choice, or if I'm complicit in something I can't even name. It was a Thursday, and the heat was brutal even by Arizona standards. By 11 a.m., it was already pushing 112 degrees, the kind of heat where the air shimmers and plays tricks on your eyes, where touching metal without gloves will burn your skin, where you go through a gallon of water before lunch and still feel dehydrated. My route that day took me through some of the most isolated territory in my coverage area. Abandoned trailer parks, defunct mining operations, scattered homesteads where people live off-grid by choice or necessity. I'd done this route dozens of times, knew most of the regulars, knew which dogs were friendly and which ones would chase my truck for a quarter mile. Around noon, I pulled up to a location I'd delivered to maybe 3 times before. It was a trailer sitting by itself about 20 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by absolutely nothing but scrub brush and cracked earth. No neighbors for miles in any direction. No trees, no shade. Just endless flat desert stretching to the horizon under that merciless sun. The trailer itself looked abandoned. Rust stains, broken windows covered with cardboard, a door that didn't quite hang straight. But someone lived there because I'd delivered packages before. and they'd always been taken inside by the time I came back through the area. The package I was delivering was heavy. Not heavy like furniture or books. Heavy like something dense and compact. It was a large box, maybe 2 feet by 3 feet, addressed to someone named Damien. No return address, which isn't that unusual, but always makes me a little cautious. The box had been sitting in my truck for a couple hours, and in that heat, the inside of my truck was probably hitting 130 degrees, even with the AC running while I drove. When I picked up the package to carry it to the trailer, I felt something shift inside. Not the sliding movement you get with poorly packed items, something deliberate. Something that moved and then stopped, like it was responding to being picked up. I stood there next to my truck, holding this package, and I felt it move again. A definite pushing motion from inside, near the top of the box. Then I heard it. A scratching sound, faint but unmistakable. Something inside that box was alive, and it was trying to get out. My first thought was animal delivery, maybe reptiles or something, though those are supposed to be clearly labeled and shipped with specific climate controls. But there were no labels indicating live animals, no air holes that I could see. Nothing suggesting this was anything other than a standard package. The scratching came again, more frantic this time, and then I heard something else that made my blood run cold, even in that desert heat. It sounded like whimpering, not an animal sound. Human. I set the package down on the ground immediately, my hands shaking. The temperature outside was deadly. Whatever was in that box had been in my truck, in that heat for hours. I needed to open it. I needed to see. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the complete silence of the location, the way the trailer seemed to watch me with those broken window eyes. Maybe it was the fact that the package was addressed to someone, delivered deliberately to this specific location in the middle of nowhere. Maybe it was the voice in my head screaming that some things, once you see them, you can never unsee. I knocked on the trailer door instead. No answer. I knocked again, harder, calling out that I had a delivery. Nothing. The trailer might have been occupied sometimes, but right now, no one was home. I looked down at the package. It had moved again, a jerking motion like something inside was throwing itself against the walls. The whimpering sound came through clearer now, and it absolutely sounded human. It sounded like someone trying to cry through a gag or through duct tape. That muffled, desperate sound that bypasses your brain and goes straight to your instincts. Every instinct I had was screaming that something was very wrong. I pulled out my phone to call 911, but out there, I had no signal. I'd need to drive at least 15 miles before I'd get even one bar. I looked at the package again, and this time I saw something I'd missed before. There was a small gap where the tape had come loose in the heat, and through that gap, I could see darkness and something that might have been fabric. I reached for the gap, started to pull the tape back further, and then I stopped, because I realized something that changed everything. If I opened this package, I would see what was inside. I would know. And once I knew, I would have to act on that knowledge. I would have to call the police. I would have to give statements. I would become involved in whatever this was. But more than that, more than my own involvement, I thought about what it meant that this package existed. Someone had sealed it. Someone had labeled it. Someone had brought it to a UPS facility and paid to have it shipped. Someone at the facility had processed it, loaded it onto a truck, and that truck had brought it to my distribution center where I'd loaded it into my vehicle. This package had passed through multiple hands, through multiple checkpoints, through the entire logistics system that I was part of. And it had ended up here, at this abandoned-looking trailer in the middle of nowhere, addressed to someone who might not even exist. The scratching was getting weaker. Whatever was inside was running out of strength in that heat, or running out of air, or both. I had seconds to make a decision. Open it and confront whatever horror was inside. Call the police and wait, knowing that every minute might matter. Or deliver it as I was supposed to and leave. The third option made me sick to even consider. But I considered it anyway because I'm being honest here, completely honest about the thoughts that went through my head in that moment. If I delivered it and left, I wouldn't know. I could tell myself I'd heard scratching, but couldn't be sure. I could tell myself lots of packages make noise when they shift. I could tell myself I'd had no signal to call for help anyway. I could tell myself I was just doing my job. I picked up the package, the sounds from inside getting more desperate, and I carried it to the trailer door. I set it down on the single concrete step, right in front of the door where I always left packages at this address. I took my photo for proof of delivery. And then I stood there, staring at this box that was moving and making sounds that I will hear for the rest of my life. I thought about my supervisor, about protocols, about chain of custody. I thought about the fact that I'd be interrogated if I opened it, that I might lose my job for tampering with a package. I thought about the fact that I had 3 kids at home and a mortgage, and couldn't afford to lose this job. And I hated myself for thinking those things while something inside that box was dying. I got in my truck and I drove. I drove for 15 miles until I got a signal, and then I called 911. I told them everything, the address, the package, the sounds, the movement. I told them I thought something alive was inside and needed immediate help. The dispatcher kept me on the line while they contacted local sheriff's department. I turned my truck around and drove back, following the sheriff's deputy who'd been patched through to my call. We got back to the trailer 40 minutes after I'd left. 40 minutes in heat that was now pushing 115 degrees. The package was gone. The trailer door was open. We went inside with the deputy, and the trailer was empty. No furniture, no personal belongings, nothing but dust and evidence that someone had been there recently. Water bottles, fast food wrappers, cigarette butts. The deputy asked me to describe exactly what I'd heard, and I told him. He looked at me like he wasn't sure whether to believe me or not. He took my statement, took photos of where I'd left the package, called it in. I gave him every detail I could remember about the box, the weight, the address label, everything. 2 days later, a detective named Sullivan called me. He asked me to come in and make a formal statement, which I did. He showed me photos of other similar packages that had been reported across Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico over the past 2 years. Same type of box, same lack of return address, same remote delivery locations, never recovered, never opened before they disappeared. The detective told me they suspected human trafficking but couldn't prove it without recovering a package. He asked me why I hadn't opened it at the scene. I didn't have a good answer. I still don't. I told him I was afraid, that I didn't know what I'd find, that I had no signal, and panicked. He looked at me with this expression I can't describe. Not quite judgment, but not quite understanding either. He told me I'd done the right thing by calling it in, but I could see in his eyes he was thinking the same thing I was thinking. 40 minutes. I'd left whatever was in that box for 40 minutes before help arrived, and by then it was gone. I still drive for UPS. I still do the desert routes. But every single package I pick up now, I think about that day. I think about the sounds I heard, the movement I felt, the choice I made to follow protocol instead of human decency. I think about the fact that somewhere, someone packed that box, someone shipped it, someone received it. And whatever was inside is gone now, disappeared into the desert or into whatever nightmare it came from. I don't know if I could have saved anyone. I don't know if there was actually a person in there or if my mind created meaning from random sounds, because that's what minds do in crisis. But I know I heard something. I know I felt something. And I know I left it there. I tell myself I called for help as soon as I could. I tell myself I followed procedure. I tell myself that if I'd opened it, I might have just made things worse, might have endangered myself, might have contaminated evidence that could have led to arrests. I tell myself a lot of things. But late at night, when I'm trying to sleep, I don't hear my own justifications. I hear scratching. I hear whimpering. And I see myself setting that package down and walking away. So I'm asking you the same question the detective asked me, the same question I ask myself every day. Would you have opened it? Would you have risked everything to know for certain? Or would you have done exactly what I did and lived with the uncertainty forever? I'm Archie, 26 years old, and I've been doing delivery work for about a year now. Started with DoorDash doing food deliveries, then expanded into package delivery when I realized the money was better and people tipped less when you brought them groceries versus their dinner. I'm not trying to make a career out of this. I'm saving up for community college, working on getting my IT certifications. But for now, this pays the bills and gives me flexibility. Most deliveries are completely straightforward. You pick up the package, you drop it off, you take a photo, you move on. But every once in a while, you get delivery instructions that make you stop up and wonder what kind of situation you're walking into. Usually it's stuff like, don't ring doorbell, baby sleeping, or leave package behind planter, porch pirates in area. Normal stuff, reasonable stuff. What happened on October 9th in rural Vermont was not normal or reasonable. And I'm still trying to understand exactly what I delivered to, and whether I should be grateful or terrified that I followed instructions I didn't understand. The delivery came through my app around 3 in the afternoon on an overcast autumn day, the kind where the clouds sit so low they're basically fog and everything looks gray and dead. The pickup was from a small postal facility in Rutland, and the drop-off was way out in the sticks, about 40 minutes into the mountains where cell service doesn't exist, and GPS gets confused by all the trees. The pay was good, though. $65 for a single delivery because it was so remote and most drivers wouldn't take it. I needed the money, and I had a dash cam that recorded everything and an external battery pack for my phone, so I figured I'd be fine. The package itself was medium-sized, maybe a foot cubed, not particularly heavy. Addressed to someone named Body at 2847 Copper Hill Road. What caught my attention were the delivery instructions. Usually you get 1 or 2 lines maximum. This had 7 separate instructions, each on its own line, each oddly specific. Arrive between 4:30 and 5 p.m. Do not arrive earlier or later. That was unusual, but not crazy. Maybe they had a schedule or a dog they needed to put away. When approaching driveway, honk 3 times. Okay, a little weird, but maybe they were hard of hearing or wanted warning. Leave package on porch facing north. Use compass app if needed. That one made me pause. Who cares which direction a package faces? Do not ring doorbell. Do not knock on door. Fine, lots of people request that. After delivering, walk backwards to your vehicle. Do not turn your back to the house. Now that was strange. Really strange. Once in vehicle, do not look in rearview mirror until you reach the main road. What? Why? Drive away slowly. Do not check mirrors for at least 2 miles. That last one made no sense at all. How was I supposed to drive safely without checking my mirrors? These instructions felt less like delivery preferences and more like some kind of ritual or superstition. I almost declined the job right there. But $65 is $65. And I figured the worst-case scenario was that the customer was eccentric or paranoid. Rural Vermont has plenty of both. I loaded the package into my car, made sure my dashcam was recording like always, and headed out. The drive took me deeper into forest than I'd been before, past a handful of working farms, past several abandoned ones with collapsed barns and overgrown fields, past stretches where trees pressed so close to the road that branches scraped my car. My GPS kept recalculating because the roads weren't on the map properly, but I'd written down the directions before leaving cell coverage. So I managed to find Copper Hill Road around 4:15. The road was unpaved, more like a wide trail, really, and it wound through dense woods where the early darkness of autumn was already settling in, even though it was only mid-afternoon. I found 2847 easily enough. A small house, relatively well-maintained compared to some of the abandoned properties I'd passed, with a cleared yard and a porch that looked recently painted. There was a truck in the driveway, so someone was definitely home. I checked the time. 4:18. The instructions said arrive between 4:30 and 5, so I pulled over about a quarter-mile back and waited. I felt ridiculous doing it, but the instructions had been so specific that I figured I should follow them exactly. Maybe the customer had cameras and would refuse to tip if I didn't comply. While I waited, I thought about those instructions again. Walk backwards to the vehicle. Don't turn your back to the house. Don't check mirrors. What was I supposed to be avoiding seeing? Was this some kind of prank? Some kind of test? Or was the customer legitimately concerned about something? At 4:28, I drove slowly toward the house, and at exactly 4:30, I pulled into the driveway approach and honked 3 times like instructed. No one came out. No lights turned on. The house just sat there looking completely ordinary. I grabbed the package, pulled up the compass app on my phone like the instructions said, and walked up to the porch. I positioned the package facing north, which felt absolutely insane, carefully rotating a box so it pointed in a specific direction, and set it down gently. Then came the weird part. I started walking backwards toward my car, keeping my eyes on the house like the instructions specified. I felt completely exposed and vulnerable, expecting at any moment for the door to open and someone to start laughing at me for following such bizarre directions. But nothing happened. The house remained still and silent. I made it back to my car without incident, got in, started the engine, and here's where I almost broke the rules. Every instinct I had said to check my mirrors, to look around, to make sure I wasn't about to back into something. But the instructions had been so precise about everything else that I forced myself to keep my eyes forward and drive slowly away, using only my peripheral vision to stay on the driveway. It took everything in me not to glance in the rearview mirror. I white-knuckled it for 2 miles, driving maybe 10 miles per hour, until I was back on a slightly more maintained road. And then I finally checked my mirrors. Nothing behind me, just empty road and trees. The whole thing felt anticlimactic and slightly stupid, like I just participated in someone's weird control game. I'd followed every instruction to the letter for $65 and probably looked like an idiot doing it. But the money hit my account that evening, along with a $70 tip and a 5-star rating, so apparently I'd done everything correctly. I didn't think much more about it until 2 days later when I was reviewing my dash cam footage. I do this periodically to clear space on the memory card, and I usually just fast forward through unless something interesting happened. I was watching the footage from that Vermont delivery at double speed when I saw something that made me stop and rewind. My dashcam has both a forward-facing and a rear-facing camera. The rear one points out the back window of my car and records what's behind me. When I pulled into the driveway at Bodie's house and got out to deliver the package, the rear camera kept recording. I could see myself walking up to the porch, setting down the package, turning it to face north. And I could see something else. Something standing at the tree line behind my car. I paused the video and leaned closer to my laptop screen. It was a person, or something person-shaped, standing completely motionless about 30 feet behind where I'd parked, partially obscured by trees. The figure was wrong somehow. The proportions weren't quite right, like the limbs were too long or the torso too narrow. The video quality wasn't great because it was getting dark and my dashcam isn't expensive. But I could see enough to know that whatever was standing there had been watching me. I let the video play forward. As I walked backwards to my car, keeping my eyes on the house like instructed, the figure moved. Not toward me, toward where I'd been standing on the porch. It moved wrong, too fluid and too jerky at the same time, like stop-motion animation. The moment I got in my car and started driving away, the figure was on the porch, right where I'd been standing 5 seconds earlier. If I'd turned my back to the house, if I'd walked normally to my car, if I'd paused to take a photo with my phone or check my delivery app, that thing would have been right behind me. I watched the rest of the footage with my hands shaking. As I drove slowly away, the rear camera showed the figure standing in the middle of the road behind me, getting smaller as I increased distance. It stood there for the entire 2 miles until I was out of frame. Just standing, watching. If I'd checked my rearview mirror like you're supposed to when driving, I would have seen it. I would have seen something that my brain couldn't process as human standing in the road. And I don't know what I would have done. Probably panicked. Probably crashed my car on those narrow forest roads. The instructions weren't weird customer preferences. They were a survival guide. Body knew something was there. Something that came when deliveries were made. Something that stood in the blind spots you're not supposed to look at. Something that followed at a specific distance. And Bodie had figured out exactly what behaviors would let a delivery driver complete the job and leave safely. Walk backwards so it can't approach from behind unnoticed. Don't check mirrors so you don't see it following and panic. Drive slowly so it stays back beyond a certain distance. Every instruction had a reason, and I'd followed them all without understanding that they were keeping me alive. I tried to research the property after that. Copper Hill Road barely shows up on maps. The few records I found indicated 2847 was owned by someone who'd lived there for decades, completely off-grid, rarely coming to town. I found one old newspaper article from 12 years ago about a delivery driver named Callahan who'd gone missing in that area. His car was found on Copper Hill Road, abandoned, driver's door open, packages scattered. No body ever found. I wondered if he'd received instructions and ignored them. I wondered if he'd turned his back or checked his mirrors or walked forward instead of backwards. I wondered how many delivery drivers Body had tried to warn before figuring out the exact sequence of actions that would keep someone safe. The question that haunts me most is what Body is doing up there. Why stay in a place where something like that exists? Is Bodie trapped? Or is Body keeping watch, ordering regular deliveries to make sure the instructions still work, to map the boundaries of what this thing will and won't do? I got another delivery request to the same address 3 weeks later. Even better pay this time, $90. Different package, same address, Same impossibly specific instructions. I declined it. Someone named Travis accepted it instead. I checked the news obsessively for days afterward, looking for stories about missing delivery drivers. Nothing came up. So either Travis followed the instructions, or I'm just not searching with the right keywords yet. I still do deliveries. Still take the remote ones, because they pay best. But now I read every single instruction carefully, even the ones that seem insane, especially the ones that seem insane. Because sometimes customers aren't being difficult or eccentric. Sometimes they're trying to save your life in the only way they can, by giving you a map through territory where something waits for you to make a mistake. Sometimes the weird instructions aren't about the package at all. They're about making sure you leave the same way you arrived. And sometimes the best thing you can do is follow directions you don't understand from people who've learned things you never want to know. I still have that dashcam footage. I've watched it maybe 50 times, always finding new details that make it worse. The way the figure's head tilts at an angle that would break a human neck. The way it doesn't seem to breathe or shift weight. The way it moves the instant my back would have been turned. I keep the footage as a reminder that some jobs pay well for a reason, and that reason isn't always about distance or inconvenience. Sometimes it's about hazard pay for a danger you can't see unless you break the rules you were told to follow. And I'm grateful I'm not curious enough to break rules just to see what happens. Because now I know exactly what happens. You end up standing face to face with something that's been standing behind you all along. My name is Catalea, and I've been a rural route postal worker for 8 years. When people hear that, they usually picture a quiet job, maybe even peaceful. Driving through countryside, waving at friendly farmers, maybe stopping for lemonade on hot days. The reality is different. Rural postal work means you're often the only government employee these remote communities see regularly. You're a witness to how people actually live when they're far from city oversight. Far from neighbors who might ask questions, far from anyone who'd notice if something wasn't quite right. Most of the time, the isolation is harmless. People want privacy, want to live on their own terms, and that's their right. But sometimes you deliver to places that make you realize isolation can hide things that shouldn't be hidden. Things that operate by rules the rest of us don't follow. Things that make you question whether you ever really left at all. September 14th was the day everything I thought I understood about my route got turned inside out. I'd been assigned a new section of rural Iowa territory, covering for another carrier named Reese, who'd quit suddenly without explanation. The supervisor told me Reese had taken a job in another state, left with only 2 days' notice, which struck me as odd because he'd worked that route for 6 years and seemed to love it. But people quit unexpectedly all the time in this job. So I didn't think much of it. The route included some addresses I'd never serviced before, deeper into farm country than I usually went. And one of them immediately caught my attention when I was sorting mail that morning. The address was listed as Community Circle, Rural Route 7, coordinates 41.2345, 93.8901. Not a street address, not a house number, just coordinates and a community name I'd never heard of. The mail going there was strange too. 12 identical envelopes, all from the same sender in Des Moines, all addressed to Resident with that same community name. No individual names, just Resident, repeated 12 times. I loaded everything into my truck and headed out around 3 in the afternoon. The day was beautiful. One of those perfect autumn days where the light turns everything golden and the cornfields stretch endless under a sky so blue it almost hurts to look at. The coordinates took me about 45 minutes from the post office, down progressively smaller roads until I was on gravel, then dirt, Then something that was barely a road at all, just tire tracks through a harvested field. And then I saw it. The community. 12 houses arranged in a perfect circle around an empty field, maybe 200 yards in diameter. Not approximate circle. Perfect circle. Each house exactly the same distance from the center, each one identical in construction. White farmhouse style, 2 stories, wraparound porch, black shutters. Brand new looking, or at least perfectly maintained. No barns, no outbuildings, no farm equipment. Just these 12 houses in their geometric precision, and in the exact center of the circle they formed, nothing. Just empty grass. Here's what made my skin crawl immediately. There were no roads connecting the houses to each other or to the outside. The track I'd driven in on led to the edge of the circle and stopped. To reach any individual house, I'd have to drive across the grass. But there were no tire tracks in the grass, no paths worn by foot traffic between houses, nothing suggesting the residents ever moved between their homes or left the circle. I sat in my truck at the edge of this community for several minutes, trying to make sense of the geography. How did these people get supplies? How did they access their homes? The houses all had driveways, but the driveways led nowhere, just ended at the edge of each house's yard. It was like someone had built 12 houses and arranged them in a circle without considering that the people living there might need to, go anywhere. I checked the mail. 12 letters, 12 houses. Presumably 1 letter per household, though they were all addressed identically. I'd have to deliver to each house individually since there was no central mailbox. I drove slowly across the grass toward the nearest house, my truck leaving the first tire tracks that field had probably seen. As I approached, I noticed details that made everything worse. Every house had identical curtains in the windows, white lace. Every house had an identical wreath on the door, dried wheat in a circle. Every house had identical rocking chairs on the porch, 2 per house, painted white. And as I got closer to that first house, the front door opened. A man stepped out onto the porch, middle-aged, wearing overalls and a plain shirt. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just stood there watching me approach. Then the door of the second house opened. Another person came out, this time a woman, similar age, standing on her porch in an identical position. Then the third door opened. Then the fourth. Within 30 seconds, every single door in the entire circle had opened, and someone had emerged from each house to stand on their porch. 12 people, all standing in exactly the same spot on their respective porches, all facing inward toward the center of the circle, which meant they were all facing me. All wearing similar clothing, simple, plain, like something from a different era. And here's the detail that made me grip my steering wheel so hard, my knuckles went white. They all had the exact same expression on their faces. Not similar. Identical. A slight smile that didn't reach the eyes. Head tilted maybe 15 degrees to the right. Hands clasped in front of their bodies at exactly the same height. Like someone had posed them. Like they were dolls arranged by the same hand. I stopped my truck about 50 feet from the first house and just sat there, engine running, trying to process what I was seeing. 12 people, all standing in synchronized positions, all watching me with that same unsettling expression. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They just stood there in perfect silence, and the only sound was my truck's engine and my own breathing, which was coming faster than I wanted to admit. I'm a professional. I've been doing this job for 8 years. I've delivered to compounds where armed people watched my every move, to homes where I suspected illegal activity, to places where I felt genuinely unsafe. But this was different. This wasn't threatening. It was wrong. Wrong in a way that bypassed rational thought and spoke directly to some primal part of my brain that recognized predator behavior. Synchronized movement, collective watching, pack hunting. I picked up the 12 letters and my hands were shaking. Protocol said I needed to deliver to each house individually if there were no centralized mailboxes. But the thought of getting out of my truck, walking up to 12 different porches while all these people watched me with their identical expressions, while they stood there in their synchronized poses like some kind of hive mind, I couldn't do it. I set the letters on my dashboard and pulled out my phone to call my supervisor. No signal. Of course, no signal. I was in the middle of nowhere in a field that shouldn't exist, surrounded by houses arranged in impossible geometry. I made a decision. I organized the 12 letters into a stack, got out of my truck with my heart hammering, and walked to the nearest house. The person on that porch, the man in overalls, didn't move as I approached, didn't shift weight, didn't blink, just maintained that tilted head smile. I climbed the porch steps and held out all 12 letters toward him. "Delivery for community circle," I said, and my voice sounded too loud in the silence. He didn't respond, didn't reach for the letters, just stood there staring at me with that expression. I set the letters down on the porch railing and backed away. As I descended the stairs, all 12 people moved simultaneously. They all took one step forward in perfect synchronization, and the sound of 12 feet hitting 12 porches at exactly the same moment was like a single footstep amplified. I froze. They stopped. We stood in tableau for several seconds. Me at the base of the porch stairs, them all in their new position, exactly one step closer to the edge of their porches. Then I walked back to my truck, forcing myself not to run, and the moment I moved, they moved. Another synchronized step. Another perfectly timed sound. I got in my truck and locked the doors, and they stopped moving. Just stood there on their porches, one step from the edge, still tilted, still smiling. I put the truck in reverse and started backing away across the field. And as I did, they all turned. Perfectly synchronized rotation, all tracking my movement, their heads swiveling to follow me while their bodies remained stationary. I've never seen humans move like that. The rotation was too smooth, too synchronized, like they were all connected to the same control mechanism. I backed all the way to the entrance track, then turned and drove away faster than I should have on that rough terrain. When I reached the main road 15 minutes later and finally got cell signal back, I pulled over and tried to process what had happened. I pulled up GPS and tried to find the location again using the coordinates. They pointed to the middle of a cornfield with no structures indicated. I tried Google Earth. Just farmland. No houses, no circle, no community. I called my supervisor as soon as I got back to the post office. I told him everything. The coordinates, the houses, the synchronized people, all of it. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a long pause. Then he asked me if I'd been feeling okay lately, if I'd been getting enough sleep. He said Reese had called in with similar stories toward the end. Talked about communities that didn't exist on maps. People who moved in synchronized patterns. He said they'd assumed Reese was having some kind of breakdown, that the isolation of the rural route was getting to him. He said maybe I should take a few days off, that he could reassign that section of the route to someone else. I should have let him. I should have taken the out he was offering me. But I heard myself saying no, I was fine. I'd just been startled by the unusual setup. I told him I'd deliver there again if needed. He said there was more mail for Community Circle the next week. I told him I'd handle it. I don't know why I said that. Maybe pride. Maybe stubbornness. Maybe because the alternative was admitting that I'd seen something impossible, and admitting that would mean questioning everything else I thought I knew about reality. The following week, I had 8 letters for Community Circle. I drove out there again, following the same route, and when I got to where the entrance track should have been, there was nothing. Just unbroken cornfield. I drove up and down that road for an hour, checking coordinates, checking landmarks. The community was gone, or it had never been there, or it had been there and moved. I still have those 8 letters in my truck. They're addressed to Resident Community Circle with coordinates that lead nowhere. They've been sitting in my truck for 3 months now because I don't know what to do with them. I can't deliver them. I can't return them because there's no return address. I can't throw them away because that's illegal. So they just sit there, physical proof that I didn't imagine everything, that there was a destination for these letters at some point, that someone processed these addresses through the postal system. I found out last week that another carrier named Orion has been assigned that extended rural section permanently. I wanted to warn him, to tell him about Community Circle, about the synchronized people, about places that exist and then don't. But what? But, would I say? I'd sound exactly like Reese sounded, exactly like someone having a breakdown. And maybe I did have a breakdown. Maybe the isolation got to me. Maybe I hallucinated the entire thing due to carbon monoxide from my truck, or some kind of mass hysteria, or just stress and exhaustion. That's what I tell myself on good days. On bad days, I remember the sound of 12 feet hitting 12 porches in perfect unison. And I know that was real. I know those people were real. I know that community exists somewhere, in some version of Iowa that overlaps with ours, but operates by different rules. And I think about how they all came out the moment I arrived. How they watched me with those identical expressions. How they stepped forward in synchronization like they were parts of the same organism. I think about what would have happened if I'd walked up to all 12 porches individually like I was supposed to. Whether they would have surrounded me in their perfect circle. Whether I would have become the 13th house, the 13th synchronized person, standing on a porch I didn't remember building with an expression I didn't remember learning. I still do my rural route. I still deliver to remote farms and isolated communities. But I don't follow coordinates anymore. If an address doesn't have a traditional location, if it relies on GPS coordinates to find it, I return it as undeliverable. I don't care what my supervisor says. I don't care about the marks on my record. Because some places don't want mail. They want carriers. And once they have you, they make you part of their geometry, part of their synchronized movement, part of whatever collective consciousness runs communities that exist in the spaces maps don't show. Reese understood that. That's why he quit. That's why he's probably somewhere far from Iowa, somewhere without rural roots or impossible coordinates or communities that arrange themselves in circles too perfect to be accidental. And someday, maybe I'll join him. But for now, I've got those 8 letters in my truck, addressed to somewhere I can't find, for residents who might not be individuals at all. And every time I look at them, I hear that sound. 12 feet, 1 step, perfect synchronization, the sound of something pretending to be human and almost getting it right. Preston here. I'm 38, been doing Instacart and shipped orders for 4 years now, mostly overnight shifts because that's when the pay surges hit and the roads are empty. I'm a night person anyway, always have been, so driving through the dark Pacific Northwest, delivering groceries to insomniacs and third shift workers suits me fine. You meet interesting people doing overnight deliveries. Nurses getting off shift, gamers who've lost track of time, elderly folks who can't sleep. Most are grateful, tip well, and you're in and out in 2 minutes. What happened on March 23rd changed how I think about those 2 minutes, changed how I think about the split-second decisions we make when someone asks us for help, and we have to choose between compassion and self-preservation. The order came through around 11:30 p.m. Grocery delivery to an address about 40 minutes outside Olympia, deep in the forest on one of those roads that's more suggestion than pavement. The payout was substantial. Base pay plus a $75 tip for a relatively small order. 20 items, mostly non-perishables, some bottled water, batteries, candles. The kind of supplies you'd want if you were preparing for a power outage or living somewhere electricity was unreliable. The delivery window was midnight to 1 a.m., which was specific but not unusual for overnight orders. I accepted it, did my shopping at the 24-hour grocery store, and headed out into a night that was quintessential Pacific Northwest in March. Constant rain, not heavy but persistent. The kind that soaks through everything eventually. Mist rising from the wet pavement. Darkness so complete that my headlights seemed to get swallowed by it. The drive took me on progressively smaller roads, past scattered houses with lights on, then past dark houses, then past stretches where there were no houses at all. Douglas firs pressed close on both sides, their branches heavy with rain, occasionally dropping loads of water onto my windshield that my wipers could barely handle. My phone signal dropped to nothing about 20 minutes into the drive, and my GPS started acting up, recalculating constantly. I'd screenshot the directions before losing signal, though, so I kept going based on landmarks. Third turnoff past the gravel pit, left at the fallen cedar, right where the creek crosses the road. At 11:55, I found the driveway. It was barely visible, just 2 muddy ruts leading into the trees, with a mailbox that had numbers painted on it matching my delivery address. The name on the order was Maximus, and the delivery notes just said, "Please deliver to front door, knock loudly." I followed the driveway for what felt like half a mile through trees so thick I couldn't see anything beyond my headlight beams. And then the cabin appeared. It looked normal enough at first glance. Small, single-story, light on inside. Smoke coming from the chimney. There was a pickup truck parked to one side, older model but well-maintained. Woodpile stacked against the cabin wall. Everything you'd expect from someone living out here. I grabbed the grocery bags and jogged through the rain to the front door, knocked loudly like the notes requested. I heard movement inside immediately, footsteps approaching fast, and then a voice from the other side of the door. Male, middle-aged maybe, but with an edge to it that made me pause. He said, "You the delivery driver?" I confirmed I was, said I had his groceries. There was a long pause, and then he said something that made absolutely no sense. He said, "I need you to do something for me, and I'll pay you whatever you want. I need you to stay here until sunrise. Just stay. You don't have to come inside. Just don't leave me alone here until the sun comes up." The way he said it wasn't casual. It was desperate. The kind of desperation you hear from someone who's genuinely terrified, whose voice is shaking because they're trying to keep it together and barely managing. I stood there on his porch with rain running down my neck, holding bags of groceries, trying to process this request. I asked him if he was okay, if he needed me to call someone. He said no calls, no police, nothing like that. He just needed someone to be here. Another person. He said he'd pay me $500 cash to just sit in my car in his driveway until sunrise, which was about 6 hours away. He said he'd bring the money out right now. I didn't even have to see him. He'd slide it under the door with his ID, so I knew he was good for it. I asked him why. What was he afraid of? And there was another long pause before he answered. And when he did, his voice had dropped to almost a whisper. He said, They only come when I'm alone. If there's another person here, someone awake, they stay back. I've tested it. Every time someone visits, every time I'm not the only one here, nothing happens. But I've been alone for 3 days now, and they're getting closer. I can hear them in the trees. I need someone to stay until morning because they leave when the sun comes up. Every rational part of my brain was screaming that this was either a mental health crisis or some kind of setup. But the fear in his voice sounded genuine. And I've done this job long enough to recognize when someone is in legitimate distress versus when they're trying to manipulate you. I told him I needed to think about it, to give me a minute. He said, "Okay, but please hurry. Please decide fast." I walked back to my car and sat in the driver's seat with the engine running, trying to figure out what to do. $500 would cover my rent. 6 hours sitting in a car wasn't that long. But something about the situation felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. The isolation, the darkness, the fact that he wouldn't open the door, the way he'd said "they" like it was understood who or what he meant. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes, windshield wipers going, rain drumming on the roof, and I watched the cabin. The light inside flickered occasionally, and I could see shadows moving, just him pacing probably. Then I saw something else. Movement at the tree line, just at the edge of my headlight range. Something pale that disappeared when I looked directly at it. I made my decision. I put the car in reverse. I know how that sounds. I know exactly how that sounds. A man begging for help, offering to pay me, clearly terrified. And I left him. But in that moment, with something moving in the trees, and 6 hours of darkness ahead, and no cell signal and no way to call for help if things went bad, I chose myself over a stranger. I chose not to find out what he was afraid of. I left the grocery bags on his porch, put the car in reverse, and started backing down that driveway. As I did, I heard him through the door. He wasn't yelling, wasn't angry. He just said, "Please, please don't leave me alone, please." And I kept driving. That voice follows me everywhere now. The desperation in it, the terror, the word "please" repeated like a prayer. I drove back to Olympia through that rain-soaked darkness, and I felt sick the entire time. I contacted Instacart and reported that I'd completed the delivery, but the customer had made an unusual request that I wasn't comfortable fulfilling. They asked if I felt unsafe. I said yes. They marked the order complete and released my payment. The $75 tip cleared. I had nightmares that night. I kept hearing his voice, kept seeing that movement in the trees, kept wondering what was happening to him while I drove away to safety. The next afternoon, I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I looked up the address and the name Maximus in local news. I needed to know if he was okay, needed to know if I'd made the right call. There was nothing recent. But when I expanded my search to include archived news articles, I found something from 8 months earlier. A grocery delivery driver named Santino had gone missing in that area. His car had been found abandoned on a forest road, engine still running, door open, groceries for a delivery scattered in the mud. No body ever found, no signs of struggle, just gone. The address he'd been delivering to was listed in the article. It was the same address, the same cabin. I sat staring at my laptop screen, reading that article over and over. Santino had accepted a late-night delivery to that address and never came home. The article said police had investigated, interviewed the resident, a man who'd lived there for 6 years, no criminal history, fully cooperative. The man had told police that Santino had delivered the groceries and left, and he had no idea what happened after that. Case remained open, but cold. No leads, no suspects. just another person who'd driven into those dark woods and disappeared. I should have felt vindicated, like my instincts to leave had been correct. But instead, I felt worse, because now I understood the situation differently. Maximus had been asking for help because he knew what had happened to Santino. Maybe he'd watched it happen. Maybe he'd been inside his cabin, unable to help, while something in those trees took Santino. Maybe that's why he was so desperate for someone to stay, because he knew he might be next. Or maybe, and this is the thought that keeps me up at night, maybe Maximus was trying to warn me. Maybe by not opening the door, by keeping me outside, by begging me to just stay in my car, he was trying to keep both of us safe from something he understood better than I did. Maybe my leaving didn't just abandon him. Maybe it triggered something. I tried to find more information about Maximus after that. Property records showed the cabin was owned by someone with that first name, purchased 6 years ago like the article said. No phone number listed. No social media presence. I thought about driving back out there during daylight, but I couldn't make myself do it. 2 weeks after my delivery, I saw a news article. Human remains had been found in the forest about 3 miles from that address. Badly decomposed, scattered, consistent with animal predation. Identification pending. The article was brief, just a few paragraphs. I checked every day for updates, but none came. I don't know if it was Maximus. I don't know if it was Santino finally found. I don't know if it was someone else entirely. The not knowing is almost worse than knowing. I still do overnight deliveries. I still take the remote ones. But I don't take orders that go to that area anymore, and I've marked that address as a no-go in my personal records. Other drivers take those deliveries now. I wonder if any of them have been asked to stay until sunrise. I wonder if any of them said yes. I wonder what they found when morning came, if they survived to see it. The question I ask myself constantly is whether I could have saved him. If I'd stayed, if I'd kept my car running and my doors locked and just waited for dawn, would he be alive? Or would whatever was in those trees have taken us both? There's no way to know, and that uncertainty is its own kind of torture. I made a choice based on fear and self-preservation, and someone might have died because of it. Or someone might have lived because I didn't give whatever was out there a second victim. Every night when I take my first delivery, I think about Maximus in that cabin and the sound of his voice saying, "Please." I think about Santino and his abandoned car and how he probably thought he was just doing his job, dropping off groceries, not realizing he was driving toward something that had been waiting in the dark. And I think about all the other delivery drivers out there, taking orders to remote locations, to cabins in the woods, to houses at the end of long driveways where help is hours away. Most of those deliveries are fine. Most of those houses are just houses, occupied by regular people who want their groceries and their packages and nothing more. But sometimes you knock on a door, and the person on the other side asks you for something you're not prepared to give. They ask you to stay, to wait, to be present during the hours when something comes out of the trees. And you have to decide in that moment whether their fear is real or imagined, whether you're being manipulated or whether you're being offered a chance to save a life. I chose wrong, or I chose right. I'll never know which. But I know that somewhere in the Pacific Northwest forest, there's a cabin where someone lived alone until they didn't anymore. And I know that I was asked to help, and I left. That's something I carry with me every night, every delivery, every time I drive into darkness and wonder what's watching from the trees. I want to tell you about the 37 minutes I lost on April 8th. and why I can never fully account for where I was during that time. Lenin's my name. I'm 29, and I've spent the last 5 years as a cross-country courier, the kind of driver who takes packages that need to move fast across state lines, the kind that can't wait for regular shipping schedules. Medical samples, legal documents, time-sensitive equipment. If it absolutely has to be somewhere by a specific deadline, companies call people like me. The pay is excellent, the hours are terrible, and you spend more time alone on highways than you do with other human beings. I'm fine with that. I like the solitude, like the long stretches of empty road where it's just me and whatever podcast or audiobook I'm listening to. I've driven every major highway system in the western United States. Know the truck stops and rest areas, know which routes have the best coffee and which ones you avoid after dark if you can help it. I thought I knew Route 66, or what's left of it. I thought I understood the geography of New Mexico's high desert. I was wrong. The delivery was straightforward on paper. Pick up a package in Albuquerque at 6 a.m., deliver it to a medical facility in Flagstaff, Arizona by 2 p.m. 8 hours for a 6-hour drive, plenty of buffer for traffic or stops. The package was small, some kind of tissue samples based on the hazmat labeling, packed in a climate-controlled case that plugged into my cigarette lighter. I'd done dozens of medical courier runs exactly like this one. I left Albuquerque at 6:15, made good time heading west on I-40, and everything was completely normal until I hit the stretch between Grants and Gallup around 7:30 a.m. That's when I saw the first detour sign. It was positioned on the shoulder, one of those official-looking orange signs with black arrows indicating the interstate was closed ahead and traffic should exit. The sign looked legitimate. Right size, right colors, reflective material catching my headlights in that pre-dawn darkness. I took the exit like the sign indicated, and immediately my GPS started recalculating. The female voice said, "Recalculating route," about 6 times in rapid succession, and then went silent. My phone showed I still had signal, still had GPS connection, but the map had frozen. I was driving on a road that didn't appear on my screen, just a blue dot sitting in empty gray space. The road I was on looked like old Route 66, or one of the many abandoned sections that parallel the interstate through New Mexico. Cracked asphalt, faded line paint, desert stretching away on both sides under a sky that was just starting to lighten from black to deep purple. I'd driven sections of old Route 66 before for the novelty of it, so this didn't immediately concern me. The detour would probably loop back to the interstate in a few miles. I drove for about 10 minutes, and then I saw another detour sign. This one directed me to turn left onto an even smaller road, indicating the main route ahead was blocked. I slowed down, looking for any evidence of construction or an accident that would necessitate a detour, but I couldn't see anything. The road ahead looked clear, but the sign was there, official looking, and I'd been trained to follow traffic control devices. I turned left. The road got narrower. The pavement got worse. My GPS still wasn't working, just showing that frozen blue dot in gray, nothing. I kept driving because what else was I going to do? Turn around and try to find the interstate on my own? I had a deadline. I had temperature-sensitive medical samples in my car. The fastest way forward seemed to be following the detour to wherever it led back to the main road. Third detour sign came 5 minutes later. Right turn onto a dirt road. And that's when I knew something was wrong, because official detours don't route traffic onto unmarked dirt roads. I stopped the car completely and got out to look at the sign more carefully in the growing dawn light. It looked official from a distance, but up close I could see it wasn't. The metal was too thin. The welds were rough. The reflective coating was paint rather than proper reflective material. Someone had made this sign. Someone had made it look official enough to pass a quick inspection from a moving vehicle. And someone had placed it here. I looked at the other signs I'd passed, could see them in my rearview mirror, and realized they were all the same. Homemade. Weathered. Someone had been placing these signs, maintaining them for long enough that they'd weathered and faded like real traffic signs. I got back in my car and checked my phone. Still had signal, but GPS was completely dead now. I tried to pull up Google Maps and it wouldn't load. I tried Apple Maps and got the same result. My navigation was just gone, like something was jamming it. I made a decision to turn around, retrace my route back to the interstate using landmarks and memory. I turned my car around on that dirt road and headed back the way I'd come. Here's where it gets strange. I drove for what felt like 20 minutes, following the roads back in reverse order. Right turn where I'd turned left, straight where I'd turned right. But I never found the interstate. The roads kept going, kept branching, and every time I thought I was backtracking, I'd see another detour sign pointing a different direction. And these signs weren't in the positions I remembered passing them. They'd moved, or there were more of them, or I was more lost than I thought. The sun was coming up now, painting the desert in oranges and reds, and I could see for miles in every direction. Nothing but empty land, rock formations, the occasional scrub brush. No buildings, no other cars, no power lines. Just road and desert, and these signs that kept appearing, kept directing me further into nowhere. I stopped the car again and tried my phone. Still had signal, 3 bars, but still couldn't load any maps or navigation. I could make calls, though. So I called my dispatcher, told him I'd gotten turned around following a detour, gave him my last known location before the GPS died. He said he'd try to locate me through my phone's GPS and call me back. I sat there in my car on this dirt road in the middle of the New Mexico desert, engine running, watching the temperature gauge on my medical package to make sure it was still within range. And I waited. My dispatcher called back 15 minutes later. He said he couldn't get a location on my phone. The GPS data was coming through corrupted, showing me in impossible locations, middle of canyons, inside rock formations, places no road could go. He asked me what I could see, what landmarks. I described the desert, the road, a distinctive red rock formation maybe a mile to my north. He said he'd try to cross-reference with satellite imagery and get back to me. Another 20 minutes passed. The sun was fully up now. I should have been making good time toward Flagstaff. But instead, I was lost on a dirt road, watching my delivery deadline slip away. I decided to just pick a direction and drive until I hit something I recognized. I chose east, toward where the sun had risen, figuring eventually I'd hit the interstate or a highway or at least a paved road. I drove for 30 minutes, and the landscape never changed. Same desert, same type of road, and the detour signs kept appearing, not frequently, but often enough that I kept seeing them, always pointing me in directions that seemed to lead further from civilization. I started ignoring them, just driving straight whenever possible. But the roads didn't always go straight. They curved and branched, and sometimes dead-ended at erosion gullies or washouts, forcing me to turn back and try different routes. At 9:47 a.m., my GPS suddenly came back online. Not gradually, but all at once. The map loaded, my position appeared, and the voice said, "Rerouting." I was 63 miles from where I should have been, on a road that according to the map didn't exist. I was somewhere south of I-40, deep in an area marked as undeveloped land. The GPS wanted me to head north, said it would take 40 minutes to reach the interstate. I followed it religiously, not trusting my own navigation anymore, just doing exactly what the voice told me to do. 37 minutes later, I was back on I-40, merging into normal traffic like I'd never left. I checked my timeline. I'd exited the interstate at 7:32 a.m. I'd returned to the interstate at 10:24 a.m. 2 hours and 52 minutes for what should have been maybe a 20-minute detour at most. I'd lost almost 3 hours, and I couldn't fully account for where I'd been during that time. The roads I'd driven on mostly didn't appear on any map. The route my GPS had shown to get back to the interstate didn't match the roads I remembered taking, and those detour signs. I'd seen at least 8 of them, maybe more. Someone had put them there deliberately. Someone had created a system to route drivers off the main highway and into the desert, into areas where GPS didn't work right, where roads led in circles or to nowhere. I made my delivery to Flagstaff 4 hours late, lost my on-time bonus, had to file an incident report explaining the delay. I told them everything, the detour signs, the GPS failure, the hours of being lost. My dispatcher pulled satellite imagery of the area where my phone had last shown a reliable location, and we found something that made my skin crawl. There was a dirt road network out there, just like I'd described. And scattered along these roads, visible from satellite if you knew what to look for, were small rectangular shapes that could have been signs. But here's the thing. The satellite imagery was from 3 weeks earlier, and it showed tire tracks on those dirt roads. Recent ones, multiple vehicles. Other people had been routed into that maze. I filed a report with the New Mexico Department of Transportation, told them about the fake detour signs. They said they'd investigate, but I never heard back about what they found. I reported it to the state police, told them I suspected some kind of trap or scheme. They took my statement, but seemed skeptical, like they thought I'd just gotten lost and was making excuses. Maybe they were right. Maybe I just got turned around in unfamiliar territory, and the stress made me misremember or exaggerate details. But I've driven through that stretch of I-40 probably 30 times since April, and I've never seen that exit with the first detour sign again. I've looked for it specifically, slowed down in the area where I remember it being, and there's nothing there. Just straight interstate. No exit, no sign. I've also started paying attention to reports of missing people and abandoned vehicles in New Mexico. There's more than you'd think. Hikers who never return, drivers whose cars are found on remote roads with no explanation for why they were there or where the drivers went. Some are found eventually. Most aren't. And I think about those tire tracks on the satellite imagery. Multiple vehicles driving into that maze of dirt roads, following signs that someone placed there deliberately. How many of those drivers made it back out? How many followed the detour signs deeper and deeper until they ran out of gas or got stuck or had some kind of breakdown in a place where help would never find them? I made it out because my GPS came back online. Because something, luck, timing, whatever, let me reconnect after those 37 missing minutes. But I don't know what I drove through during that time. I don't know if I went in circles, if I passed the same landmarks multiple times without recognizing them, if I was being watched by whoever maintains those signs. I don't know if I was supposed to make it back to the highway or if I was just lucky. What I know is that somewhere in the New Mexico desert, there's a network of roads that mostly don't appear on maps, marked by signs that look official but aren't, designed to pull drivers into empty country where normal navigation doesn't work. And I know that I lost time there, lost minutes or hours that I can't fully account for, driving roads that don't exist toward destinations that were never real. Sometimes I think about the medical samples I was carrying. Time-sensitive tissue samples that needed to reach their destination on schedule. What if that was the point? What if someone knew that medical couriers carry valuable materials and designed a system to intercept them? But then why let me go? Why did my GPS start working again? Why was I allowed to reach the highway and continue my delivery? I don't have answers. What I have is a route I avoid now, a stretch of highway where I stay in the middle lane and watch for orange detour signs that might not be what they seem. And I have 37 minutes of my life that are just gone, compressed into corrupted GPS data and fading memories of roads that wind through empty desert toward nothing at all. There are moments in life where reality fractures, and you're standing in two places at once, the present and a past you thought was buried. My name is Gideon. I'm 42 years old. Been driving for Amazon for 3 years now. And before that, I spent 15 years bouncing between jobs and cities, never staying anywhere too long, never putting down roots. I grew up in Florida, left when I was 20, and spent 2 decades making sure I never had a reason to come back. Moved to Colorado, then Oregon, then Nevada, always west, always away. But life has a way of pulling you back to places you've been running from. My mom got sick last year, needed someone nearby, so I moved back to Central Florida to help her out. Took the Amazon delivery job because it was flexible and the pay was decent enough. Started driving routes in areas I didn't recognize, suburbs that hadn't existed when I was a kid, developments built on what used to be orange groves and swampland. I told myself I was fine, that enough time had passed, that the geography of my childhood was buried under strip malls and housing communities, and I'd never have to confront it directly. I was wrong. November 3rd was an ordinary day that became the day I delivered a package to an impossibility. My route was heavier than usual, 167 packages covering a 40-mile radius south of Orlando. I'd been driving for 6 hours, was on package 141, running on autopilot and coffee, just following the GPS and dropping boxes. The sun was starting to set, that golden hour light cutting through the humidity and cypress trees, turning everything orange and dreamlike. My next stop came up on the GPS, and the address made me pause. 4516 Marsh Oak Lane. I knew that address. I knew it the way you know the scar on your own hand, the way you know a phone number you haven't dialed in 20 years but could still recite perfectly. It was my childhood address, the house I grew up in from age 5 to 17, the house that burned down the summer after my senior year while my family was visiting relatives in Georgia. Total loss. Foundation and chimney were all that remained. We never rebuilt. Took the insurance money and moved away. Scattered to different cities, never spoke about it much. But Marsh Oak Lane was gone. The whole street had been demolished during a development project 8 years ago, according to county records I'd looked up when I first moved back. The land had been cleared, rezoned, turned into part of a commercial complex. There was a strip mall there now, or a storage facility, or something equally mundane. The street name didn't exist anymore, so seeing it on my GPS made no sense. I figured it was a database error, some old address that hadn't been purged from the system. I delivered the package to wherever the GPS actually took me, probably some new construction that had been assigned a recycled address. These things happen in rapidly developing areas. Followed the directions, and with every turn my confusion grew because I recognized the route. The same roads I used to take home from school. Past the spot where the 7-Eleven used to be, now a chain pharmacy. Past where my friend Cesar's house had been, now empty lots. And then I turned onto what the GPS said was Marsh Oak Lane, and it was there. Not a new street, The old street. The same cracked asphalt I remembered, the same curve, the same massive oak tree on the corner that had to be 100 years old. And houses. Not new construction, old houses. The same houses that had been demolished. I pulled over and just sat in my van, trying to understand what I was seeing. The street looked exactly as I remembered it from 23 years ago. The Jenkins house on the corner with the chain-link fence. The Rodrigo family's place with the boats in the driveway. The empty lot 3 houses down where a house had never been built when I was growing up. Everything was the same, except it couldn't be the same because this street had been raised 8 years ago. I'd seen the county records. I'd seen the development permits. I pulled up Google Maps on my phone to cross-reference, and it showed me exactly where I knew I was, in the middle of a commercial complex parking lot. But I wasn't in a parking lot. I was on Marsh Oak Lane. I kept driving, following the GPS, and my hands started shaking when I saw 4516 coming up on the right. My childhood home, except it had burned down in 2003, except it couldn't exist. But there it was. Single-story ranch house, painted the same pale yellow I remembered, same black shutters, same porch with the concrete that had a crack shaped like lightning. Same mailbox my dad had installed when we first moved in, slightly crooked because he'd never been good at that kind of work. I sat in my van across the street from this house that shouldn't exist, trying to remember how to breathe. The package I was supposed to deliver was addressed to G. Morrison, 4516 Marsh Oak Lane. Morrison is my last name. G could be Gideon, but it could also be Gerald, my father, or Grace, my mother. I checked the delivery notes. No special instructions. Standard package, not particularly large. I delivered thousands of packages in 3 years and never thought twice about the names on them. But this one I stared at. Someone named G. Morrison at my childhood address ordering something from Amazon. I should have driven away. Should have marked it as undeliverable, wrong address, any excuse. But I couldn't. I needed to know what was happening, needed to understand how any of this was possible. I grabbed the package and walked up to the house, and with every step, I noticed more details that were exactly right. The third paving stone on the walkway was cracked in the same diagonal line I'd tripped over when I was 8. The porch had the same slight tilt it had always had, draining to the left. The house number was the same brass digits, the 6, slightly higher than the other numbers because my dad had never fixed it. I reached the front door and stood there holding this package, and I could smell smoke. Not fresh smoke. Old smoke. The ghost of smoke soaked into wood and memory. I knocked. I don't know why I knocked instead of just leaving the package like I was supposed to. Maybe because some part of me needed to see who answered, needed confirmation that this was real, or that I was hallucinating, or that there was some rational explanation. No one answered. I knocked again, harder. Nothing. I tried the doorbell, heard it ring inside with the same 2-tone chime I'd heard 10,000 times growing up. Still no answer. I set the package down and turned to leave, and that's when I looked through the window next to the door. The interior was visible through a gap in the curtains. I could see the living room. And it was our living room. Not just similar. Identical. The same brown couch my parents had owned, positioned in the same spot against the same wall. The same coffee table made of dark wood with a water ring stain from where I'd left a glass without a coaster. The same entertainment center, same TV that had been modern in 1999. The same family photos on the wall, including the one of me at age 12 holding a fish I'd caught on a trip to the Keys. I stepped back from the window like it had shocked me. This was impossible. The furniture had burned in the fire. The photos had burned. Everything had been destroyed, and even if it hadn't, my parents had moved away, had sold or donated whatever had survived. None of this should exist, and yet I was looking at it, arranged exactly as it had been arranged in the summer of 2002. I pulled out my phone to call someone. My mom, my dispatcher, 911, anyone. But I had no signal. Full battery, but 0 bars. I walked back to my van, and the signal came back immediately. 3 bars. I walked toward the house again and watched my signal disappear at the property line. Something about this location was blocking cell service. Or something about this version of reality I'd stepped into didn't include cellular networks. I got in my van and marked the package as delivered, took a photo of it sitting on the porch, and sat there trying to decide what to do next. I could leave and never come back. Could pretend this hadn't happened. Could convince myself I'd been confused or had misremembered my old address. Or I could stay and try to understand. The sun was setting fast now, and in the growing darkness, the house looked even more like I remembered. Lights came on inside. Not all at once like someone flipping switches, but gradually, like they were on timers or like someone was moving through the house, turning them on room by room in a pattern I recognized because I'd lived there for 12 years. I watched the light come on in what had been my bedroom. Second window from the left, facing the street. I saw a shadow move past the window. Person-shaped, but I couldn't make out details. Then the kitchen light. Then the hallway. Whoever was in there was following the exact pattern my family had followed every evening when we'd come home. Bedroom first to change clothes, kitchen to start dinner, hallway to adjust the thermostat. I sat in my van watching this pattern repeat itself, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 20 years. I felt like I was coming home. Like if I walked back up to that door and opened it, I'd find my family inside. My dad watching TV, my mom making dinner, my younger brother Wade doing homework at the kitchen table. All of us together before the fire, before everything fell apart, before we became people who lived in different states and spoke maybe twice a year. The urge to go inside was overwhelming. I wanted to open that door and step back into 2002, into a version of my life where the fire never happened, where we never lost our home, where my family stayed intact. My hand was on the door handle when I stopped myself. Because I realized something. The fire had been ruled accidental but never fully explained. Electrical failure was the official determination, but the investigation had found anomalies. Burn patterns that didn't quite match the supposed origin point. My parents had never wanted to talk about it, had shut down any conversation about the details. We'd always just accepted that we'd lost our home and moved on. But what if there was more to it? What if something about that house, about that location, had caused the fire? What if it was still there? I pulled my hand back from the door handle and instead drove away. I drove slowly, watching the house in my rearview mirror until I turned the corner. And the moment I lost sight of it, everything changed. The street I was on was suddenly different. The old houses were gone. I was driving through a parking lot exactly like Google Maps had shown. The commercial complex that had replaced Marsh Oak Lane. I pulled over again and looked back. But there was no residential street, no yellow house, no Marsh Oak Lane. Just a storage facility and empty parking spaces. I drove around the complex 3 times, trying to find it again, trying to get back to that street, but it was gone. I checked my delivery app. The package to 4516 Marsh Oak Lane showed as successfully delivered with the photo I'd taken of it on the porch. But when I looked at the photo closely, I could see something I hadn't noticed when I took it. The front door was open. Just slightly, maybe an inch, like someone had cracked it to see who was outside. And in the darkness beyond that open door, I could see what looked like a figure standing in the hallway, watching. I've tried to go back. I've driven through that area dozens of times, during the day and at night, following my GPS and following memory. The street is never there. The commercial complex is always there, exactly where county records say it should be. But my delivery app still shows that address in my completed deliveries, still shows the photo of a house that shouldn't exist. I showed the photo to my mom, asked her if it looked familiar. She went pale and asked me where I got it. When I told her I delivered there, she made me promise never to go back to that area, never to accept deliveries to any address on Marsh Oak Lane. She wouldn't explain why. Just said some places have bad histories, and you don't go back to places that burned for a reason. I asked her what she meant by that, what really happened in the fire. She said we lost our home, and that was all that mattered, all that ever needed to be said about it. But the way she said it, the fear in her voice, made me understand that she knows more than she's telling. That maybe the fire wasn't accidental. Maybe we didn't lose our home. Maybe we escaped it. I still drive for Amazon. Still deliver to that part of town. But I never get another delivery for Marsh Oak Lane, and I'm grateful for that. Because I think about that package I delivered, addressed to G. Morrison. I think about the shadow moving through the house, following patterns from 23 years ago. I think about the figure standing in the hallway watching me through a barely open door. And I wonder if it was my father, my mother, my brother, or me. I wonder if somewhere in that house that burns and rebuilds itself, there's a version of my family that never left, that's been going through the same routines for 2 decades, trapped in the summer of 2002, forever approaching the moment when everything burns. And I wonder if by delivering that package, by standing on that porch and knocking on that door, I almost joined them. The delivery that appeared on my scanner at 4:17 a.m. wasn't there when I started my shift. And I'm certain of that because I check everything twice. I'm Kiara, 36 years old, and I've been doing overnight medical supply deliveries for 9 years. This isn't a job you fall into by accident. It requires certifications, background checks, and the kind of personality that doesn't mind driving alone through darkness, delivering medications and equipment that people need to stay alive. I'm meticulous about my routes, obsessive even. I review every stop before leaving the facility, cross-reference addresses, check special handling requirements, map out the most efficient sequence. My scanner gets synced at exactly midnight when my shift starts, and I screenshot the manifest to my phone as backup. 37 deliveries tonight, all along the Maine coast, all scheduled and accounted for. That's what made stop number 38 impossible. I'd completed 33 deliveries by 4 a.m., was running ahead of schedule, feeling good about finishing early and getting home before sunrise. I was driving north on Route 1, about 20 miles south of Camden, when my scanner chimed with the sound it makes when a new delivery gets added to the route. I almost ignored it, assumed it was a system glitch because new deliveries don't get added at 4 in the morning, not on my shift, not without a phone call from dispatch explaining the emergency. But the chime kept repeating, insistent, so I pulled over to check it. Stop 38 had appeared in my manifest. No address, just coordinates. 44.1947, 69.0621. The recipient name was listed as K. Morrison. My last name is Morrison. My first name is Kiara. The package ID was a string of numbers that didn't follow the standard format we use, and the delivery notes just said, "Urgent, deliver immediately." I checked my phone screenshot of the original manifest. 37 stops. This 38th stop wasn't there. I called dispatch and got voicemail, which was unusual because someone always answers overnight for medical couriers. I left a message asking about the new stop and whether it was legitimate. While I waited for a callback, I entered the coordinates into my GPS. The location was about 15 miles ahead, up in the hills overlooking Penobscot Bay. The GPS showed it as a dead-end road that terminated at a cliff edge overlooking the ocean. No buildings indicated, no addresses, just a road that stopped where land met water. I checked my cargo area. 34 packages remaining for my last 4 scheduled stops. I looked at each box carefully, checked the package IDs against my manifest. None of them matched the ID for stop 38. Whatever I was supposed to deliver to those coordinates wasn't in my vehicle. This had to be a system error, a corrupted file, some kind of database glitch. I decided to complete my remaining scheduled deliveries and then swing by the coordinates after to confirm there was nothing there. I'd document it, take photos, file a report about the scanner malfunction. 9 years of perfect performance reviews meant I knew how to cover myself when technology failed. I finished stops 34 through 37 by 5:30 a.m. The sky was starting to lighten, that pre-dawn gray where you can see shapes but no colors yet. My scanner kept chiming every few minutes, reminding me about stop 38, getting more insistent. The sound was different now, too, more urgent, almost aggressive. I muted it and drove toward the coordinates, following my GPS up into the hills on roads that got progressively narrower and rougher. The road that led to the coordinates was barely visible. More like a hiking trail that someone had driven on enough times to create tire ruts. The GPS said 0.2 miles to destination, and I could see the road ended ahead at what looked like a small clearing. I drove slowly, branches scraping my van, until I emerged into a space about 40 feet across where the road just stopped at a rocky cliff edge. Penobscot Bay stretched out below in the growing dawn light. Fog rolling across dark water. Lighthouse beam visible in the distance. There was a car parked at the cliff edge. A sedan, engine running, driver's door open, headlights on, pointing toward the drop-off. The car looked familiar in a way I couldn't immediately place, and then I realized why. It was the same make, model, and color as my personal car. Not just similar, identical. Same year, same trim level, same aftermarket roof rack I'd installed. I parked my van and got out, and I could hear the sedan's engine idling, could see exhaust visible in the cold morning air. I approached slowly, irrationally nervous, and looked inside. The interior was empty. No driver, no passengers. Keys in the ignition, radio playing the same station I listened to. And sitting on the driver's seat was a package. Medium-sized box addressed to Kiara Morrison at coordinates that matched this exact location. The package ID matched the one in my scanner for stop 38. I stood there in the pre-dawn cold trying to understand the logistics of what I was seeing. Someone had driven my car, or a car identical to mine, to these specific coordinates. Someone had left the engine running and the door open. Someone had placed a package addressed to me using my full name, with a package ID that had appeared in my work scanner hours ago. And someone knew I'd come here to find it. I didn't touch the package immediately. I walked around the car, looking for any differences between it and my personal vehicle. The license plate was different, registered to Maine, but not my plate number. The interior had the same fast food receipts I'd been meaning to clean out of my car. The same air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror. The same coffee stain on the passenger seat from when I'd hit a pothole last week. This wasn't just the same model car. This was Somehow my car, or a perfect duplicate of it down to the smallest details. I checked my phone to call the police, but I had no signal up here. I walked back to the package on the driver's seat. The return address was listed as my home address. The shipping date was today's date. The package had supposedly been shipped from my house to these coordinates this morning, which was impossible because I'd been at work since midnight. I picked it up. It was heavy, dense, like something metal inside. I shook it gently and heard no movement, just solid weight. There was no note, no explanation, nothing except my name and this location. My scanner chimed. I looked at it. Stop 38 was now marked as driver arrived, deliver package. But I was holding the package. I was supposed to deliver it, but it was addressed to me at the location where I currently stood. How do you deliver a package to yourself at a place where you already are? I set the package back on the driver's seat and returned to my van, thinking I'd just leave, report this to the police from somewhere with cell signal, let them figure it out. But when I tried to start my van, nothing happened. Dead battery, which made no sense because it had been running fine seconds ago. I checked the battery connections. Everything looked normal. I tried again. Nothing. The sedan behind me continued idling. Door still open. Package still sitting on the seat. I stood between the two vehicles in that clearing as dawn broke fully, fog starting to burn off the bay below. And I realized I was being given a choice. Walk away and figure out how to get help with a dead van and no cell signal, or get in the sedan that was identical to my personal car and deal with the package addressed to me. Every instinct said to walk away. Hike back down to the main road, flag down help. But I thought about my delivery log. 9 years of perfect records. 37 completed deliveries tonight. 1 remaining stop that my scanner said was urgent, that my system said I needed to complete. The part of me that had built a career on following procedures, on completing every delivery, on never leaving a job unfinished, couldn't just walk away from an incomplete route. I went back to the sedan and looked at the package again. There was a small note I'd missed before, tucked under the address label. It said, "You've been delivering to this stop your entire career. Today, you're here to pick up instead of drop off. Check your records." I pulled up my phone, looked at my delivery history in the app. I scrolled back through 9 years of completed deliveries, and my hands started shaking. Stop 38 appeared in every single shift. Every night I'd worked, there it was. Same coordinates, same recipient name, my name. Sometimes it showed as completed, sometimes as skipped, sometimes as undeliverable. I had no memory of ever delivering to these coordinates before tonight. No memory of ever seeing this location. But according to my records, I'd been here hundreds of times. I checked my personal calendar, my own records I kept of my shifts. None of them showed this stop. Only the company system had it. Buried in the data, 1 stop among thousands that I'd apparently been delivering to or attempting to deliver to for my entire career. I opened the package. Inside was a scanner. My scanner, or one identical to it. Same model, same asset tag number, same scratches on the case from years of use. The screen was on, showing a single message. Shift started 4:17 a.m. 1 delivery remaining. Deliver scanner to Kiara Morrison at coordinates 44.1847, 69.0621. I was looking at a scanner that was telling me to deliver itself to myself at the location where I was currently standing. I looked at the scanner in my other hand, the one I'd started my shift with. Both were identical. Both showed the same asset number. Both were somehow the same device. I set the one from the package down on the car seat and looked at the one I was holding. The message on it had changed. It now read, "Shift completed. 38 deliveries. Return to facility. But I'd only completed 37, unless this stop counted. Unless delivering the scanner to myself or receiving it from myself or whatever had just happened counted as the 38th delivery. The sedan's engine suddenly cut off. The headlights went dark. The door closed by itself with a soft click. I tried to open it again, but it was locked. I looked in the window and the interior was empty. No package, no scanner, no receipts or coffee stains or air freshener. Just an empty car that looked like mine but wasn't. My van started behind me. I heard the engine turn over, heard it running normally. I walked back and got in, and everything was normal. Battery showing full charge. All systems functional. My scanner showed 38 completed deliveries. I had cell signal again. I drove away from that clearing and back down to Route 1. And when I looked in my rearview mirror, I couldn't see the dirt road I'd just come from. Just unbroken forest. I finished my shift and returned to the facility. My scanner synced normally. 38 deliveries completed. Perfect record maintained. But I can't find stop 38 in any of my records anymore. I've checked my phone screenshots, my personal logs, the company system. It's gone. Like it was never there. Like I imagined the entire thing. Except I know I didn't. I know I drove to those coordinates, saw that car, opened that package. I know that for one moment I held two identical scanners that were somehow both the same device. And I know that according to a system that tracks every moment of my workday, I've been making this delivery or attempting to make it for 9 years without ever knowing it. I think about the note in the package. You've been delivering to this stop your entire career. Today you're here to pick up. What had I been delivering all those other nights? What had I been bringing to those coordinates hundreds of times without remembering? And what did I pick up? What did I bring back with me when I left that clearing? I still do my overnight medical routes. Still check my manifest obsessively, still screenshot everything. But now I look at my completed deliveries differently. I wonder how many of them I actually remember making. I wonder how many stops I've been to without knowing it. How many packages I've delivered that weren't in my cargo area. How many versions of reality I've been driving through thinking it was just a normal shift. And I wonder if someday I'll get another delivery to those coordinates. And if this time I'll be the one sitting in the car waiting for myself to arrive. I signed for my own package delivery, and I have the signature to prove it. Except I've never been to that town in my life. Name's Shiloh. 33, been running regional deliveries through Appalachian territory for 7 years. Know these mountains like most people know their own neighborhood. When you drive the same routes long enough, you stop thinking about navigation and start thinking about other things. What you're making for dinner. Whether you remembered to pay the electric bill, why your ex keeps texting you after 2 years. That autopilot mode is usually fine until it isn't. Until you take a turn you've taken 100 times before and somehow end up somewhere you've never been. That's what happened on June 18th during a thunderstorm that turned afternoon into midnight. And I'm still trying to understand what it means that I found evidence of myself in a place I'm certain I've never visited. The storm rolled in fast the way they do in the mountains. 1 minute clear skies, and the next minute the world turns black and water comes down like someone opened a dam overhead. I was about 40 minutes into a route that should have taken 3 hours total, had 60 packages in the back of my truck, was running exactly on schedule. The rain hit so hard I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. Had to slow to maybe 15 miles per hour just to stay on the road. Lightning was constant, thunder shaking my truck, the kind of storm where you start thinking about pulling over and waiting it out except there's nowhere to pull over on these narrow mountain roads. You just keep driving and hope for the best. I came to an intersection I've driven through probably 300 times, where Route 19 intersects with County Road 47, and I needed to stay straight on 19. But there was a tree down, completely blocking the road, fresh from the storm. I could see where lightning had struck it. Could smell the burnt wood even through my closed windows. I had to detour. County Road 47 was the logical choice. Would loop around and reconnect with my route about 10 miles ahead. I'd driven it before, not often, but enough to know it was paved and maintained. I turned right, and immediately the storm seemed to get worse. Rain so heavy my wipers couldn't keep up even on maximum speed. The road started descending, winding down into a valley I didn't remember being there, getting steeper and narrower. I checked my GPS, but it had frozen, just showing a spinning loading icon. No cell signal either, which wasn't unusual in these mountains, but the timing was inconvenient. I kept driving because what else was I going to do? Turn around on a road barely wide enough for my truck and try to go back uphill in this storm? Forward was the only option. After about 20 minutes of descent, the rain started to lighten, and I realized I'd driven below the storm. The valley I'd entered had clearer weather, overcast but not pouring, visibility returning, and I saw the town. The town. Didn't recognize it, which should have been my first warning because I know every town within 100 miles of my regular routes. This place wasn't on my mental map. Small valley community, maybe 20 buildings total, arranged along a single main street. Old architecture, the kind you see in towns that were founded in the 1800s and never quite updated. Wood frame houses, front porches, rocking chairs. I drove slowly down what I assumed was the main street, looking for any indication of where I was, what this town was called. No signs, no businesses, no people visible. But every house had someone on the porch, and they were all rocking. Not unusual for small mountain towns, people sit on porches in rocking chairs all the time. But as I drove past the first house, then the second, then the third, I started to notice something wrong. They were all rocking at the same speed, same rhythm, back and forth, perfectly synchronized, like they were connected to the same mechanism. I slowed my truck to a crawl and counted. 17 houses, 17 porches, 17 people in rocking chairs. Men, women, different ages as far as I could tell. All dressed in similar clothing, plain and simple, all rocking in perfect unison. I stopped my truck completely and just watched them for a minute. Not a single person looked at me. They all stared straight ahead, faces expressionless, rocking in that same mechanical rhythm. The synchronization was so precise, it looked artificial, like animatronics at a theme park. I honked my horn. Nobody reacted, just kept rocking. Same speed, same rhythm, no acknowledgement that a delivery truck had just driven into their town. My GPS was still frozen, phone still had no signal. I needed to ask someone for directions, figure out where I was and how to get back to Route 19. I got out of my truck and walked up to the nearest house, where an older man sat rocking on the porch. I said hello, asked where I was, asked if he could point me toward Route 19. He didn't respond, didn't even look at me. Just kept rocking, staring straight ahead with empty eyes. I tried the next house, a woman probably in her 50s. Same thing. No response, no acknowledgement, just rocking. I went to a third house, a younger man, maybe my age, and I waved my hand in front of his face. Nothing. He stared through me like I wasn't there, rocking in perfect rhythm with everyone else. That's when I noticed the sound. The rocking chairs all creaking together made one unified sound, like a heartbeat, like breathing. Creak, 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 creak. Perfectly timed. I backed away from the porch and looked down the street at all 17 houses, all 17 people, all moving as one. And I felt something I can't quite describe, like déjà vu but stronger. Like I'd been here before even though I knew I hadn't. Like my body remembered something my mind didn't. I walked back to my truck, and that's when I saw the package. It was sitting on my driver's seat. Medium-sized box addressed to someone in this town. I checked my delivery manifest. There was no stop scheduled for any town in this area. But the package existed, had a proper label, proper routing information. The address just said, Valley View, House 12. I looked at the houses. Most had numbers visible, and I spotted number 12 halfway down the street. Every logical part of my brain said to leave this package, drive out of this town, get back to my route. But 7 years of delivery work had built certain habits, certain compulsions. I had a package addressed to this location. I needed to deliver it. That's what I did. That's who I was. I grabbed the package and walked to House 12, where a middle-aged woman sat rocking with all the others. I climbed the porch steps. She didn't react. And I set the package down by her front door. Standard procedure when someone doesn't answer. But then I saw the clipboard sitting on the porch railing next to her rocking chair. It had delivery receipts on it, going back months based on the dates I could see. The top sheet was blank, waiting for a signature. I filled in the delivery information, date, time, tracking number. And then I looked at the previous delivery receipt underneath it. The signature on it was mine. My handwriting, my signature. I flipped through the other receipts on the clipboard. Every single one going back 6 months had my signature on it. Different dates, different tracking numbers, different package descriptions, but all signed by me, delivered by me. Except I'd never been to this town before today. I was certain of that. I stood on that porch with thunder rumbling in the distance and this woman rocking beside me in mechanical rhythm, and I tried to understand what these receipts meant. Had I been here before and forgotten? Was this some elaborate prank? Had someone forged my signature? But the handwriting was too perfect, including the small flourish I do on the H in Shiloh that I've never seen anyone else replicate. I checked my phone's location history, but it still had no signal, so nothing would load. I looked at my delivery records from the past 6 months, scrolling through my digital manifest. No stops in any town called Valley View. No deliveries to this area at all. But according to this clipboard, I'd been here dozens of times. I turned to ask the woman about it, and she was looking at me. Not through me anymore, at me. Her eyes were focused, present, and she smiled. Not a warm smile, a knowing smile. Like she'd been waiting for me to figure it out. Then she spoke, and her voice was wrong, layered like multiple people speaking in unison. She said, "You come here every Tuesday. You've been coming here every Tuesday for 6 months. You just don't remember the drive back." I backed away from her, and she kept rocking, kept smiling. All 17 people on all 17 porches had stopped rocking. They were all still now, all turned toward me, all with that same knowing smile. And I felt time slip. That's the only way I can describe it. Like someone had edited my experience and removed frames. 1 second I was on House 12's porch, the next second I was in my truck driving uphill out of the valley. No memory of walking back to my truck, no memory of getting in, no memory of starting the engine, just a gap where those actions should have been. My GPS came back online suddenly, showing I was on County Road 47 heading back toward Route 19. My phone signal returned. 3 hours had passed. 3 hours. I'd entered that valley around 2 p.m., and now it was past 5 p.m. But I had no memory of those 3 hours except the maybe 20 minutes I remembered experiencing in the town. I checked my delivery manifest. One package marked as delivered to Valley View at 2:47 p.m. Photo attached showing the package on the porch. Signature received. My signature. I looked at the photo, and in the background I could see my own truck, could see myself standing on the porch. Me. Taking a photo of a delivery I don't remember completing. I finished my route in a daze, kept checking my delivery records, kept looking at that photo. When I got back to the depot, I asked other drivers if they knew about Valley View. Nobody had heard of it. I checked maps. No town by that name in the region. I drove that same route the following Tuesday. Took County Road 47 deliberately looking for the turnoff to that valley. Never found it. The road just loops around and reconnects with Route 19 like it's supposed to. No descending path, no valley, no town. But every Tuesday since then, I check my delivery records at the end of my shift. And every Tuesday, there's one delivery I don't remember. Different towns, different addresses. But always on Tuesday. Always around the same time. Always with my signature and a photo showing me making the delivery. I've started keeping a camera running in my truck all day Tuesday, recording everything. But when I review the footage, there are gaps. Hours where the camera appears to have been off, though I never turned it off. And in those gaps, according to my records, I'm making deliveries. I'm going places, signing receipts, taking photos, living a version of my Tuesday that I can't access or remember. I don't know if I'm losing time or gaining it, if I'm living one Tuesday or two every week. I don't know if there are other versions of my life happening in parallel, other routes I'm driving, other towns I'm visiting that I can't remember or prove exist. What I know is that every Tuesday I wake up with a sense of dread, wondering where I'll go that I won't remember, what I'll deliver, who I'll meet in my other life that runs alongside this one. And I know that somewhere in the Appalachian Mountains, there's a town where 17 people rock in perfect synchronization, where my signature appears on receipts for deliveries I don't remember making, where I've been going every Tuesday for months without knowing it. The worst part isn't the lost time. It's the question of what else I've forgotten. If I can lose 3 hours every Tuesday, if I can drive to entire towns and have no memory of it, what else has been edited from my experience? How much of my life is actually lived versus how much is just gaps I've filled in with assumptions? I still drive my routes, still make my deliveries, but I don't trust my own memory anymore. And every Tuesday, I check the receipts. 15 years is a long time to carry mail. But somehow it all comes down to this. One photograph, one woman who shouldn't remember me, and the sickening realization that I never had a choice in any of it. They call me Briggs. 59 years old. Been with USPS rural routes for exactly 15 years as of today. And this is my last shift before retirement. I should feel relieved. Maybe nostalgic. Definitely tired. Instead, I feel something I can't name. Something that started when I sorted my final route this morning and saw an address that made my hands stop moving. 8472 Windmill Ranch Road. I know that address. I know it because it was my very first delivery 15 years ago when I started this job. June 14th, 2010, first stop of my first route. I remember it clearly because I was nervous, wanted to make a good impression, wanted to prove I could handle rural territory even though I was 44 and starting over after my construction business went under. The ranch had been remote, 20 miles from the nearest town, nothing but Texas plains and sky, and one windmill visible from the road. An elderly woman had answered the door, thanked me for the package, and I'd driven away thinking that wasn't so hard. I could do this job. That was my first memory as a postal carrier. And now, 15 years later, my last delivery was going to the same address. I told myself it was coincidence, poetic maybe, a nice symmetry to bookend my career. The package was light, addressed to resident, with no specific name. Standard stuff. I loaded it with the other 43 packages I had to deliver today, told my co-workers I'd see them at the retirement party tonight, and headed out into a Texas morning that was already hot by 7 a.m. I worked through my route methodically, saying goodbye to customers I'd seen weekly for years, accepting their congratulations, their small gifts, their thanks. The mail carrier becomes part of people's lives in rural areas, becomes expected, becomes family almost. I'd watched kids grow up on my route, watched people get married and divorced, watched farms succeed and fail. 15 years of other people's stories, and now it was ending. Windmill Ranch Road was my last stop, timed deliberately because I wanted to see it again, wanted to close the circle, wanted that sense of completion. I turned onto the ranch road around 4 in the afternoon, sun starting its descent toward the horizon, heat shimmering off the pavement. 20 miles of straight road through empty plains, dust devils dancing in the distance. That windmill standing like a sentinel marking the property. The ranch looked exactly as I remembered it. Single-story house, weathered but maintained, wraparound porch, pickup truck parked in the driveway. I pulled up, grabbed the package, and walked to the front door. Before I could knock, it opened. The elderly woman stood there, smiling at me with recognition. She said, "Briggs, right on time. I've been waiting for you." I was wearing my name tag, so her using my name wasn't unusual. But something in her voice made me pause. She said it like she knew me, like we were old friends, not like a customer greeting their mail carrier. I handed her the package and said this was my last delivery before retirement, mentioned that this address had been my first delivery 15 years ago. She smiled wider. She said, "I know. That's why I'm glad you're here. Come inside for a moment. There's something you need to see." I should have declined. Should have said I had a schedule to keep, a retirement party to get to. But something in her voice, some quality I can't describe, made me follow her inside. The house was dim, curtains drawn against the afternoon heat. Cool in that way, old houses stay cool without air conditioning. She led me to her kitchen table and gestured for me to sit. She was moving more easily than I'd expected for someone who'd been elderly 15 years ago, but I didn't think much of it. She set a photograph in front of me. Old-fashioned print photo, the kind from before everything was digital. The image showed me standing on her porch, holding a package, smiling. I was wearing my USPS uniform. I looked exactly as I do today. The woman said, "June 14th, 2010, your first delivery." I stared at the photo. I remembered that day, remembered standing on her porch, but I didn't remember her taking a photo. I asked her why she'd photographed me. She said she photographs all her first deliveries. She has a collection. She pulled out a box from under her kitchen table and opened it. Inside were dozens of photographs, hundreds maybe, all showing postal carriers on her porch. Different people, different eras based on the uniform styles and photo quality. Black and white photos that had to be 50 years old. Color photos from the 70s and 80s. More recent digital prints, all showing the same porch, the same door, different carriers holding different packages. She spread them out on her table, and I looked at them, trying to understand what I was seeing. One photo caught my attention. A carrier from what looked like the 1980s based on the uniform and photo quality. He looked like me. Not similar, identical. Same face, same build, same expression. I picked up another photo from the 60s. Same person, same face. Me. I looked at photo after photo and saw myself repeated across decades, wearing uniforms from different eras, but always the same face, always the same person. The woman said, "You've always come back here. Different names sometimes, different decades, but always the same person. Always starting your postal career here, always ending it here." I told her this was impossible. These were coincidences. People who looked like me but weren't me. She shook her head. She asked if I'd ever wondered why I chose this career. Why at 44, after my business failed, I suddenly decided to become a rural mail carrier. I told her I needed the job, needed the benefits, needed something stable. She asked if I remembered the moment I decided. The exact moment. I tried to recall and realized I couldn't. The decision felt like it had always been made, like I'd been heading toward it my entire life, without knowing it. She said that's because I had been. She said the route I'd driven for 15 years, the addresses I'd visited, the people I'd met, all of it had been predetermined. All of it leading to this moment right now where I'd complete the circle and start again. I stood up to leave. This was nonsense, some kind of dementia or confusion. She was mixing up memories, confusing different carriers. But she asked me one more question. She asked if I'd ever noticed anything strange about my route, about the addresses I delivered to. I sat back down because I had noticed things. Small things I'd dismissed or forgotten. Addresses that seemed to repeat in different areas. Names that appeared multiple times in different towns. A sense sometimes of having delivered to places I'd never been before. Once, about 7 years into my career, I delivered to an address and the customer had thanked me for always being so punctual. Said I'd been delivering to them for 20 years. I'd corrected them, said I'd only been a carrier for 7 years. They'd looked confused, insisted they'd been receiving mail from me much longer. I'd assumed they were mixing me up with my predecessor. The woman pulled out one more photograph. This one showed me sitting at her kitchen table, looking at photos spread out in front of me. Wearing the same uniform I was wearing right now. The same expression of confusion and growing horror I could feel on my face. The timestamp on the back said June 14th, 2010. The day of my first delivery. She said, "You've been here before. You're always here on your last day. And then you forget. And you start again. And in 15 years you come back. The circle completes itself every 15 years. You've been running the same route for longer than you know, living the same 15 years over and over." I looked at the photograph of myself sitting at this table, and I remembered. Not clearly, not fully, but enough. I remembered sitting here before. I remembered seeing these photos before. I remembered this conversation, this moment, this feeling of reality collapsing. And I remembered leaving, driving back to town, going to my retirement party, and then nothing. The memory stopped. And the next memory was June 14th, 2010, being 44 years old, starting my first day as a postal carrier, delivering my first package to this exact address. 15 years. The same 15 years. Over and over. How many times had I lived them? How many times had I sat at this table seeing evidence of my own repeated existence? The woman said she didn't know how many loops I'd completed. Her records only went back to the 1940s when her family bought this ranch. But there had been postal carriers before then. She said, "Some people get stuck in loops, living the same period over and over, and most never realize it. She said I was unusual because I kept coming back to the same address at the beginning and end, because I maintained just enough consistency that she could track me. She said she'd been trying to help me see the pattern, trying to leave breadcrumbs for myself, but each time I forgot. I asked her how to break the loop, how to stop repeating these 15 years. She said she didn't know. She said maybe the loop would break if I chose not to return to work tomorrow, not to start the cycle again. But would I have that choice? Or was the next loop already predetermined? I stood up to leave, and she handed me the photograph of myself sitting at her table. She said to keep it, to put it somewhere I'd find it when the loop restarted, to give myself evidence. I took it and walked out to my truck, and the Texas sky was painted orange and purple with sunset. I drove back toward town thinking about 15 years, about all the deliveries I'd made, all the people I'd met, all the moments that felt real but might just be repetitions of moments I'd lived before. I thought about my retirement party tonight, about the speeches and the cake and the gold watch they'd probably give me. And I thought about tomorrow, about whether I'd wake up as a 59-year-old retiree or a 44-year-old starting a new job. I went to the party, smiled, accepted congratulations, gave a speech about how much the job had meant to me, how much I'd missed the route and the people. Everything felt hollow, performative, like I was acting in a play I'd performed too many times. My coworker Colin asked if I was okay, said I seemed distant. I told him I was just tired, just emotional about ending this chapter. He said he understood that retirement was a big change. I almost told him the truth, almost showed him the photograph, almost explained that I'd been doing this job for longer than 15 years, that I'd been trapped in a loop I couldn't break. But I didn't. What would be the point? At midnight, I drove home, parked my truck, walked inside my house, set the photograph on my kitchen table where I'd see it first thing tomorrow morning, and I went to bed wondering what version of tomorrow I'd wake up to, whether I'd be ending something or beginning it again, whether I'd ever actually escape these 15 years or if I was bound to them forever, completing the same circle, delivering to the same addresses, living a life that resets before I can move forward. The photograph is still on my table. I look at it every morning, and every morning I'm 59 years old, retired, trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. So far, the loop hasn't restarted. So far, I'm moving forward into days I haven't lived before. But I keep the photograph as a reminder that time isn't always linear, that some of us get stuck in repeating patterns we can't see, delivering the same messages to the same addresses in cycles we don't understand. And I keep checking my memories, looking for gaps, for repetitions, for evidence that I'm still trapped. Because the scariest thing isn't being stuck in a loop. It's not knowing whether you've already escaped or if you're just between repetitions, waiting for the circle to complete itself one more time. If you've made it this far, if these stories have unsettled you the way they've unsettled me, then you understand something important. The world is stranger than we admit, and the ordinary moments of our lives can hide extraordinary terrors. I share these experiences, these encounters from the backroads and forgotten places, because someone needs to document them. Someone needs to remember. Subscribe to Verified Fears for more true stories from delivery drivers who've seen things they can't explain, been places they shouldn't have found, and lived through moments that changed how they see reality. Because the road you're driving might look familiar, but that doesn't mean you know where it leads. Stay safe out there, and remember, some deliveries aren't just packages. Sometimes they're warnings.